Chapter 6 The Airfield. Izuku wakes up to the sound of thumping every couple of minutes. At first it wasn't enough to stir him awake, but after the 10th one or so, the slight disruption caused Izuku's eyes to flutter open. He was immediately disoriented because this was not his room, and the silk sheets underneath him weren't his. This wasn't his bed either. He looked around, experiencing a bit of vertigo from the confusion. Before, memories from the previous night came rushing back. The boat party, the swimming, the little fiasco with Katsuki and Kimi, drinking with Ren, the captain's quarters, and then the whole debacle of what happened afterwards when Katsuki had stormed in. Izuku's cheeks flushed at the thought, and he sat up, touching his chest, trying to force his emotions to not go berserk like it did the previous night. He remembered his acceptance of his jealousy. That didn't mean he accepted his feelings. You can be jealous without actually liking someone, right? Izuku tried to justify himself, even though it made no sense. He remembered watching the scene of Katsuki and Kimi unfold before his eyes, and that terrible twisting feeling in his stomach. Izuku pushed that down. Now was not the time to be harboring anything towards Katsuki. He was expecting his head to feel worse than it did. However, overall, he felt fine. He was grateful for Katsuki to make him a drink of water and eaten food the previous night on their way back to the blonde's home, for the alcohol was digested decently well into his system. Izuku scanned the room, and it looked to be a guest room with cream-colored walls and matching furnishing. On the nightstand, a glass of water and a painkiller was laid out, and Izuku felt a flutter of tenderness in his chest at the thought that Katsuki has a wordless way of showing care, even if he'll say any excuse to claim he didn't. Izuku takes the pill in case a headache ensues later, and slid himself off of the bed to see where the thumping sound had come from. Retrospectively, he felt a little strange about having to be taken care of, and the fact that Katsuki had left the party partly because of him, especially after everything that went down. Although his damp swim shorts were still on, Katsuki had changed him out of the wet shirt, taken the jewelry off, and given him a black t-shirt instead. Izuku checked his phone to see several text messages and calls from his friends. The words overwhelmed him, as he saw his name popping up from so many people, and he set the device down. Izuku walked towards the window, which filtered in a beautiful hazy morning light into the already warm-toned room, and peered out. The Bakudeku family home had a large backyard with a manicured green lawn in the middle. The fence was lined with trees, and it overall looked very clean. And in the middle of the green lawn was the pole vault practice set up. The last time Izuku had been here was so long ago, but he knew that this was put in place probably when Katsuki began pole vaulting. Katsuki had poured cement onto part of the lawn so that they could have a permanent pole vault pit set up. There was no track, but instead just grass, which meant that after practicing on grass, he'll be even faster on a track field. The back pad was industrial grade, as well as the bases. The base was currently set at 7'11", and the blonde himself was there. This was so far the highest bar Katsuki had attempted. The thumping Izuku had woken up to earlier was Katsuki's pole vault hitting the vault box to launch him into the air. The greenette leaned against the windowsill and watched. The athlete began his run, pole correctly positioned in his hand, and then when he was in the distance, hit the box with his pole and was airborne in seconds. And right as he reached the peak, Katsuki let go. He didn't clear it. The blonde fell correctly onto his back, and wasted no time to get up, setting up the bar again and going back into start position. And then repeated it again and again and again. Izuku watched in awe. He has watched Katsuki from the moment the athlete began his sport, and yet seeing the dedication and passion inside the boy still stunned him. Many things about Katsuki can be disagreeable, disheartening, and off-putting. Izuku's confusing feelings of jealousy and flutters can be one of them. The greenette still cannot figure it out, or at least cannot admit to himself what was going on. His brain was in shambles, but something that will remind Izuku every time of why he looked up to this man was watching Katsuki fail again and again and again, and still get up to practice another round. Pole vault is the only place where Izuku has seen Katsuki vulnerable, even if it's not explicit, because it takes a lot to fall in front of others and get back up again to fail another round. Maybe it was because Katsuki knew eventually he'll be able to clear it. The blonde will never talk about it or show his reaction to his failures to others, but Izuku still sees it. If he truly didn't care, then Katsuki would not have made it as far as he had in the sport. Izuku stands and watches for a while until, at one point, he sees the blonde fall on the mat to his knees and his head tilted up, staring at the bar. A frustrated expression was on his face, and Katsuki wiped the sweat off his brow before taking a deep breath. Frowning, Izuku suddenly felt the urge to come down there and encourage the other. Whenever Katsuki doesn't clear a bar at practice and there's people watching, he plays it off well. He gets up immediately, resets it, and doesn't even look like it bothers him. Suddenly, Izuku felt like he was invading on a private moment, because it's the first time that he's seen Katsuki look clearly upset at repeating failure. He doesn't show this emotion when people are around. With a heavy heart at the sight of Katsuki's frustration, the greenette found his way up to his own bedroom and he's out of the bedroom and down the stairs. For not having came over for a long time, Izuku is surprised that he still walks around the Bakugo home as if he remembered every crevice. The stairs winded down to the living room, and Izuku walked his way towards the kitchen, where he knew there was a door that led to the back. When he approached, there was someone in the kitchen. Tall, slender, and blonde. Mitsuki Bakugo stood in the kitchen pouring a cup of coffee. Izuku had seen her a couple of times when she's come over to his mother's house, but they were never alone in the same room. Katsuki had mentioned the previous night that his mother wasn't home, which meant that Mitsuki must have gone back from some kind of business trip this morning. Izuku? Mitsuki had noticed the greenette coming down the stairs. Good morning. Izuku smiled and waved. Good morning, Aunt Mitsuki. Would you like a cup of tea? The woman asked, and Izuku nodded. She fished out another mug from the cabinet. Izuku decides that he'll sit for a couple minutes and pulls out a bar stool from underneath the granite kitchen island. How have you been? Izuku asked, genuinely curious. Mitsuki always had a strong aura everywhere she went, for her voice carried and her attitude was reasonable but firm, and she made everyone in the room respect her. I've been doing very well, Izuku. Thank you for asking. She smiled with her eyes as she slides over a cup of coffee choked full of creamer and sugar for Izuku. I remember when you were tiny, Inka would never let you drink coffee, but when you came over, you'd stare over the counter with those big adorable eyes, and I'd give you a tiny sip, she recalls. But now you're all grown up and handsome, aren't you? She winks. Izuku shyly scratches the back of his head. I'm all right. Mitsuki shakes her head. You're too humble, Izuku. Have a little more confidence in yourself. I would have thought being around Katsuki all the time these days would rub off on you. It does, Izuku laughs. But I don't think it'll be anything near his level of confidence, no matter how much time I spend with him. Mitsuki chuckles at that. I suppose not. But really, you've grown up beautifully, she smiles. Inko's always around when I'm over, so I haven't had the opportunity to tell you that personally. Izuku was flattered as he sipped from his mug. Thank you, Aunt Mitsuki. It's no problem, she replied, and then curiously joked. I'm surprised Katsuki hasn't made a move yet, considering how much he insisted that he will marry you when he was younger. Izuku was surprised at this and cackled. You can't be serious. Oh, I am. She rolled her eyes at the memory. The little brat would talk off my ear every day and night about it. It's always Zuku this or Zuku that, and he was ready to propose then and there at the age of 4. The green-eyed boy couldn't stop laughing at this. Although he knew any sentiment of that was gone by now, it was nice to think that the child version of Katsuki wasn't repulsed by him. He also could not remember the last time the athlete had referred to him by anything other than Deku and other nicknames. Honestly, knowing me, I would have said yes back then, Izuku joked. Mitsuki snorted and took a large gulp of her coffee. Then I don't know what'll happen between you two, but I'm happy for this, she gestured. Project, you're a good influence on him. Izuku looked out the slightly open blinds into the backyard and smiled. He's a horrible influence on me. Mitsuki shook her head with a grin at this. Knowing how ink is, you probably need some of it. At this, Izuku was reminded of what Katsuki had told him once, when they were on their way to Dolly. Izuku had called him crazy, to which the athlete had told him that he probably needed some of it. He thinks it's funny how Katsuki talked like his mother. If that's indicative of anything, then maybe the blonde will mellow out over the years. Izuku then hops off the bar stool. Thank you for the coffee. I think I'm going to go out there and see how he's doing. Izuku then frowned a bit. He seems a little frustrated. Mitsuki grabs the dirty mug to place in the sink. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Izuku looked over to her in confusion. Her red eyes looked up at this. If you're right and he is frustrated, then Katsuki's not going to want to see you. Katsuki's not going to want to see, much less try to help. Izuku pursed his lips. He could have guessed something like that. Why? The woman shrugged. He's never talked much about it, so I just stopped asking. The rascal hates not being able to do something, but I think what he hates more is having people who care about him see him unable to do something. You know what I mean? Izuku wasn't sure he did, but still he said, I think so. And so she breathed out and turned on the sink to wash. Part of me thinks that people put too much expectation on him from such a young age, and this is the way he's dealing with it. By shoving people away? Izuku laughs. I'm not sure I understand. More like by convincing himself he doesn't care. Mitsuki offers up her point of view. Because if he can successfully tell himself that he doesn't care, then if he disappoints someone, then it wouldn't matter. Izuku feels as if he's only read about the idea in psychology textbooks, but he's never seen emotional blockage like this in person. And so, you and Uncle Masura don't bother anyone? Don't bother anymore? Nah, Mitsuki shrugs. He takes care of himself. Even if he's frustrated, he gets over it. He's been like that for so long that no one really bothers anymore, not even his friends. It's just how Katsuki is. Izuku frowned. Something about that felt wrong to him, almost neglectful. Even then, none of it explains why Katsuki and him fell off all those years. He wants to take a moment to ponder on it a little longer, but he doesn't have time to, as the back door opens a moment later, and in comes the athlete covered in sweat, smelling like freshly cut grass from the outside. Any sign of frustration and vulnerability from earlier was replaced with his usual expression. Katsuki was good at switching back to his normal nonchalant state. Oi, you shits talking about me? Katsuki grumbled as he headed straight for the fridge to get a cup of water. Better be about how fucking great I am. Mitsuki had given up on controlling Katsuki's vile language, so she rolls her eyes. Not everything is about you, Katsuki. We were merely discussing how beautiful Izuku over here has grown up. Don't you agree? Izuku felt betrayed, because why in the world would she set him up like this? Izuku's cheeks flushed, wanting the sequence of conversation to be over already. Katsuki's eyes flash over to his while he drinks his water. There's no word until the cup is set down on the counter and Katsuki runs a hand through his damp hair. Deku, did you drink some water? The blonde ignores his mother's question altogether. Izuku was grateful. He had been expecting something either rude or sarcastic. Izuku nodded. Yeah, I did. Good, Katsuki said while throwing a sweat towel over his shoulder, because that shit from last night probably dehydrated the fuck out of you. Mitsuki eyed the two of them. What happened last night, Nothing, hag. The blonde shooed her away. Go to work or something. Oi, Deku, come on. Let's get you away before she spews propaganda down your ear. Izuku shakes his head and grins. Kachan, don't call your mom that. Why not? Katsuki asked ridiculously, while jogging up the stairs. You should try it sometime. I'm sure Auntie would be thrilled. Izuku looked terrified at the suggestion, following behind. She'd perform an exorcism on me. That's actually fucking hilarious. Katsuki grinned before throwing the door open to his room. I'm gonna shower. Stay here. Don't touch anything. Izuku most definitely did not listen, because the moment Katsuki disappeared into his adjacent bathroom, the shorter male had a field day. Katsuki's room has changed quite a bit since they were little, but not too much that is unrecognizable. The walls were painted in elegant navy blue with dark gray hardwood floors. A four-poster bed with a white fur comforter and matching blue silk sheets framed the middle of the room, and there was a warm lighting coming from a contemporary design lamp. Katsuki's room was relatively neat and organized, but didn't look dead. There was character there for sure. There were shelves on either side of the TV mounted with trophies upon trophies, medals, plaques, and all kinds of achievements, all perfectly displayed in a glass case built into the wall. Katsuki didn't have any pictures up, but instead posters of pole vault legends or his favorite childhood superheroes were framed neatly. On a small cabinet with glass doors, Izuku could peer inside and see old toys, figurines, and collector's cards that Katsuki still kept on display, and he smiled at that. On top of the drawer was more of a mess. Small things here and there that the blonde didn't seem to want to throw away, but didn't know where to put it either. Some mixtapes of his favorite 80s tracks, a tube of chapstick, some unopened condoms, okay, Izuku thought to himself, a couple postcards from iconic hiking locations. Oddly enough, 2 toy model airplanes that Izuku traced his fingers on. He remembered faintly of Katsuki's interest in airplanes when they were little, and Izuku squinted and reached out a hand to pick up the couple of photos that were sitting underneath a book, tugging it from underneath. He held it up and shuffled through the 3 photos. The first was a picture of Katsuki and some of his pole vault friends. The athlete was not smiling in the picture, but everyone else was, arms thrown around each other with the track field and Issei's green mountains behind them. Izuku smiled at that. The next was just a scenic photo of the view from what looks to be a beautiful waterfall lookout. Turning the photo over, it was dated around last year in some city about a day's train ride away. But it was the last photo that surprised Izuku, because as he turns to the next one, the last thing he expected it to be was one of the 2 of them, when they were little, with the playground they met at in the background, and Katsuki was holding onto his hands in this particular photo. Both of them were smiling. Izuku stared at it for a while. He wasn't sure why Katsuki still had this. Izuku was positive that he's even lost his copy of the photo, but his heart beats a little quicker at the thought that the blonde, after all this time, still keeps this photo around. Izuku heard the door rummaging, and he quickly tucks the photo underneath the book again and plops himself on the comforter. Katsuki exits the bathroom door to see Izuku splayed out on the bed like a starfish and snorts. "You enjoying yourself?" Izuku lifts his head and nods. "This is so soft. I love it." Katsuki sits down in the chair nearby. "Oi, how are you feeling?" Izuku pulls himself up in a sitting position. "I'm fine," and then he looks down shyly. Thank you for bringing me here last night." Katsuki shrugged. "You were being an idiot. It's just community service." The blonde caught the pillow and grinned. Oh, Izuku threw a pillow at him. "Just say you're welcome like a normal person." The blonde caught the pillow and grinned. "Don't tell me what to do, nerd." Izuku then sat with his legs crossed together and told Katsuki, "Kachan, you seriously need to apologize to Ren about what happened last night." At the mention it looked like Katsuki's tone soured as he sat back with a bored look. "And why should I?" Izuku bit his lip. "Kachan, you punched him without knowing he was also intoxicated, and threatened to kill him, twice." Katsuki then looked down at his knuckles, turning his hands to see the redness from how hard he had hit Rin. "I did, huh?" "He might sue you." Izuku looked concerned. Katsuki didn't look like he cared. "He won't, because then he'd have to admit he had alcohol in his system before being able to legally drink. We'd both get in trouble." Izuku really wanted him to apologize, but he knew how stubborn Katsuki was, so he just sighed and said, "If you say so." "I know so," Katsuki affirmed. "Either way, calm your ass down. Kiri texted this morning and said he took care of him. The bastard is fine. He's a bit pissed, but understands my intentions. I don't have to say shit to him." Izuku felt a little calmer after hearing that. "That's good." The blonde leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "So, do you want to stay here and annoy me for a couple hours, or should I take you back?" Izuku laughed. Why do your invitations always sound so mean?" "I can't be letting you think you're not bad to be around or anything," Katsuki smirked. "That'd be the end of the world." Izuku's eyes widened at this. Katsuki had simultaneously both admitted to and not admitted that he didn't mind Izuku's presence, and although that should have been obvious since the blonde hung out with him more than required for the project time, it was the first time Katsuki had said something about it, and Izuku couldn't help but feel his heart begin to beat a little bit quicker. Izuku beamed. Even your compliments are mean. You truly are something else, Kacchan. Katsuki snorted to himself. Aren't I? Since he had told his mother he'd get home around noon for lunch, Izuku was able to stay for a couple hours. In that time, the two of them just hung out in Katsuki's room and played video games extremely competitively. Izuku should have taken the opportunity to call Katsuki a nerd for how intense and serious he took the gameplay, but decides to not get into an argument right then. Izuku was on his stomach on top of the blonde's bed, while Katsuki was on the floor up closer to the screen, and since Mitsuki and Masura were now both off at work, they could yell at each other as loud as they wanted to. And later, when Katsuki drops him off at his house, he forgets for a moment that the absolute crisis he had gone through the previous night. About the absolute crisis he went through the previous night. Because this morning had just felt so normal, and he had woken up to the sight of Katsuki practicing, so he was happy. Maybe the previous night's feelings were just a bluff. He probably knew deep down that they weren't, but when Izuku goes upstairs to collapse back onto his own bed, he makes it a point to not have his mind drift too deep into thinking. No good conclusions ever come from doing that. The next time Izuku sees Katsuki was on Tuesday, and since the both of them have been pretty busy with the beginning of the week, Katsuki decides to take it chill that evening and comes over to Izuku's house for the project hour rather than having them go out. Izuku doesn't mind. He likes having the other over.
Hey, sorry, not trying to break the flow or anything. I just wanted to tell y'all that I just got a mic, so hopefully the audio is better. Anyways, let's get back into it. Izuku doesn't mind. He likes having the other over, for it brought a bit more excitement into their otherwise mellow household. And also, his mother never had to cook if Katsuki came over, because the blonde would hungrily whip up something in their kitchen, with conveniently enough leftovers for both Izuku and Inko. Because of that, Inko never really protested if Katsuki dropped by the house. It was much easier to stay there than to go out. Issei I was now in the middle of their spring semester, which meant that things were picking up the pace, and classes, clubs, and everything else. And as the midpoint of the project marks itself, the Greenet finds himself remembering the deal that was made. At the end of the project, he is to leave Katsuki alone and get out of his sight. Izuku remembers when he had first offered up the deal, and how, although he didn't want to, he still felt as if he was able to. But now, there was no way in hell the boy would have ever guessed that their relationship would look like how it does now. In no world would he have figured that Katsuki would start to become such a pivotal part of his life, such a prominent feature, that suddenly taking him out and getting out of the blonde's sight was doing things to his heart already. Every time he thought about it, Izuku felt dread course through his body and a longing that he tries to get rid of, but persists. Izuku, as part of the student council at Issei I, has been helping with the preparations for the spring dance, which was their school's equivalent of prom. Everyone would dress up into their beautiful gowns and go to the school's gym, which would be decorated with beautiful lights, balloons, strings, and whatnot, dance the night away. Izuku was in charge of contacting companies to cater for the event, so he's been busy with that. And Katsuki, he's been practicing like crazy for the first regionals tournament that will be happening this weekend. All of the local ones have been cleared, and most of the school's vault team have passed into the first regional tournament, held at the stadium over the next county over, about an hour and a half away. Everyone is Issei, from the students to their grandparents, were deep into what was going on at Issei I, where the famed Bakugo Katsuki attends. There were predictions that during the first regionals tournament, which featured competitors from 4 different countries and 16 schools, Bakugo will only need to jump 17 feet, which was well below his record that he performed at the Youth Nationals the previous year. Katsuki himself was thinking the same thing. It'll only be in about 2 to 3 tournaments will he begin to jump closer and closer to where his record was. And then after that is nationals, but this time in the adult division. And so, this evening, as Izuku and Katsuki sit on the greenette's bed and watches some superhero movie, they take the time to relax a bit before continuing their hectic week. Izuku notices that Katsuki likes to make commentary throughout the entire movie, and he doesn't mind because he enjoys listening. At some point, they had a disagreement about the best character in the film, and a small popcorn fight ensues. Izuku was not going to enjoy cleaning that up, but what he did enjoy was the laugh he got out of the blonde. Katsuki's laugh was nice to hear, and it felt special since the blonde didn't genuinely laugh much. Izuku, as he listens to it, wonders to himself, was feeling this way towards Katsuki inevitable? I'd rate that a 6 out of 10. Katsuki gives his final opinion when the movie end credit scene begins. The planes they used were cool. Izuku smiled at that. Kachan, all things to notice about a movie, and it's the planes? Katsuki shrugged. I've always liked looking at them. Maybe it's the pole vaulter in me, but when I was a kid, I wanted to fly like that. I think deep down, that's why I started the sport in the first place. In my stupid-ass kid brain, I thought maybe it'll help me fly too. Ain't that dumb. Izuku rests his chin on his palm. I think that's kind of sweet, actually. Shut up. Katsuki threw a stray piece of popcorn at him. Izuku hummed and then countered what Katsuki had said earlier. Going back to the movie, I'd personally say it was a 4 out of 10. Oh? Katsuki raised a brow. Picky, eh? Izuku defended himself. As you often remind me, I am a bit of a nerd, so I have a high standard for these movies. He beams proudly. Speaking of, how's the comic issue that you forced me to drive you to get? Katsuki leaned back on the bed and rolled his eyes in annoyance. It was great, Izuku exclaimed, before twisting his body to face Katsuki, and then continuing to rant to the athlete, now that he was on a roll and the other had asked about it. Izuku feels appreciated in times like this, when casually Katsuki would ask about something, and it was sometimes things that Izuku knew the other wasn't really that interested in, but the blonde would ask anyways. It was in moments like that where Izuku believes that the friendship wasn't exactly one-sided. And so, it ended on a cliffhanger? Katsuki asked, once Izuku was done ranting. Sadly, the greenette leans on his arms. I'll have to wait a couple weeks to the next edition, and you're going to take me to get that one too. Katsuki leaned up for a second to flick Izuku's forehead. You've been getting very bossy, you little shit. Izuku laughed. Or maybe you've been getting a little soft, Kachan. Katsuki flexed his arms like a cocky bastard. Me? Soft? Never. And then Katsuki's phone dinged with a text, and the blonde fished the device out of his pocket. Upon reading it, the boy slowly got up into a sitting position and replied to it. Izuku watched him intently, wondering who it was. Who is it? Izuku asked, wondering if he was being intrusive. Katsuki pulled himself off the bed before reaching down to grab his keys. It was well over the 1 hour minimum, and they've already taken the picture for proof, so he could leave whenever. Kimi, Katsuki replied. You know her? Izuku's stomach dropped. It happened so quickly that he didn't even have time to prepare himself for the sudden hit of emotions, serving as a reminder that no, the problem he had encountered a couple days ago did not just disappear. It was still there, all right, waiting for him to feed it. And Katsuki mentioned the girl's name. Izuku's mind flashed back to the way he held her, the way he kissed her. Izuku fucking hated how he was feeling, more than anything, and the fact that it was coming back full force only proved to him that he was fighting a pointless battle. Izuku found himself letting out a strained, Yeah, I know her. What does she want? Katsuki slid on his shoes, which were stationed at the corner of Izuku's room. What do you think she wants? Oh, Izuku didn't know why he kept asking questions he already knew the answer to. Each word punches him in the stomach, and he hated feeling like this. Anyway, you mind if I grab a bottle from your fridge? Katsuki asked as he grabbed the door frame. I'm thirsty as hell. The popcorn fucking dried my throat. Izuku didn't say anything. He merely stayed in the still position he had been in, staring at Katsuki as he began to leave. He had no right to want Katsuki to stay longer, yet he did. Izuku cursed himself for wanting such things. and he could barely think above the wrenching feeling in his stomach, so much that he ignored the blonde's question altogether. And when Katsuki noticed the silence and looked back over at Izuku, he had to snap to the other into the moment again. "Oi, Deku, did you hear me?" Izuku blinked and caught eyes with the ruby-red ones, and struck by them, as he usually did, Izuku was hit with the need to have them near a little longer. So, without thinking, the greenette found himself asking. He asked with a soft voice, "If I asked, is there any chance that you'd stay?" He was so stupid. Why would he ask that? He wondered to himself once it slipped from his lips, and he regretted it more when he saw something flash across Katsuki's face before his expression went back to normal. When Katsuki replies, Izuku feels like the blonde has all the cards in his hand. "And do what?" Izuku pursed his lips, looking down at the sheets. "Never mind," he laughed nervously. "It's nothing as exciting as what you're about to go do." Why'd he ask that in the first place? He was so stupid, he thought to himself. Katsuki was silent for a bit, and Izuku was afraid he just made himself a little too obvious before the blonde asked gruffly, "Well, you won't fucking know if you don't ask." Izuku looked up and blinked at Katsuki, feeling himself about to stammer, but he forced control into his voice. "Can you stay?" Katsuki honestly should not have said that if he had no intentions on staying, because Izuku sat there feeling like a fool for a good moment as Katsuki stood there at the doorframe looking at Izuku curiously. He felt like such a fool. And he felt even more stupid and embarrassed when, without a word, Katsuki turns around and leaves. Izuku felt so fucking dumb and was probably going to think about this moment for the rest of the night. He hears the blonde's footsteps going down the stairs, and then Izuku, not wanting to think about how foolish he just made himself look, numbly got himself off the bed and into the bathroom to grab a small bag from underneath the cabinet. Walking back inside, Izuku begins to silently clean up the mess they had made. He wanted to cry, but he knew crying would make him even more ashamed, because this was his own fault for acting out of his boundaries, and now he didn't want to think, not about where Katsuki was going, who he was going to, what he had just said, and how obvious and idiotic he just looked. He picked up the popcorn from the floor and places it in the bag, all while controlling his breathing so he doesn't cry at how he acted. Then Izuku heard footsteps going back up the stairs, and he honestly did not want to see his mother right now. He felt like any word was going to make him lose control of his emotions. And yet his mother never came. Instead, Katsuki sauntered back into the room, kicked off his shoes, and threw 2 water bottles on Izuku's bed and set a tray of half sandwiches on a table nearby. Izuku watched him with wide eyes through the entire sequence of events, unsure what to say or do. He was on his knees on his carpeted floor, bag full of stale popcorn in his hand, as he watches the blonde grab a water bottle and gulp down half of it in one go. Katsuki threw it back on the bed. "I got us some real food and water, because no way in hell I'm surviving off popcorn." Izuku felt more relieved and happy than he should have. Katsuki was staying. He was staying with him rather than going off to someone's place and having a lot more fun and pleasure. Izuku was not going to cry, he had to tell himself. Not over this. Not over this. And so the greenette laughs, eyes filled with delight. "You ate a big meal, literally a couple hours ago, Kachan." "My metabolism works fast, shut up." Katsuki defended himself before crouching down to help Izuku with the popcorn. And then he said, "Since I'm staying, you better be entertaining." Izuku snorted, and then without thinking said jokingly, "Do you want me to suck your dick or something to make up for it?" And when Izuku had realized what he said, which was completely not something he'd usually say, it was too late, for Katsuki had paused what he was doing from across him. Izuku's cheeks decided to turn red now, as he nervously looked up at Katsuki. The athlete's eyes widened fractionally before looking away, and Izuku wanted to yell out. Izuku stopped what he was doing and pointed his finger in Katsuki's face, practically shouting, "Kachan, are you blushing? No way." No way, no way. Shut up. Katsuki slapped his finger out of his face and scowled. I'm not... You idiot. Izuku giggled. You most definitely were, Kachan. I'm not forgetting this moment. I'm gonna run you over, just enough that you'll lose your memory then. What kind of joke was that, you nerd? Katsuki threatened. I don't get it, though. Izuku wanted to cry from laughing. It's not like you're not used to hearing that. Katsuki then flicked his forehead. I am. Then what is it? Izuku leaned in to ask out of curiosity. Katsuki rolled his eyes. When you say it, it's just different. Izuku hummed. How so? The blonde leaned back and ignored the question. Instead, made a comment back about the tournament this upcoming weekend. Are you gonna make it to the tournament? Izuku shakes his head. Yeah, I'm riding with Shoto. Roundface and the other one ain't coming? Katsuki asked. No, Izuku shrugs. They have something going on Saturday. Also, why do you keep on asking? I always come. Katsuki reached over to grab half a sandwich off the plate. You promise? Izuku smiled softly, less happy than he did before. Yeah, until our project ends, of course. We made a deal, remember? At that, Katsuki goes silent and looked up at Izuku with his usual intense eyes. I remember. Izuku wished he wouldn't. Izuku also wished that he had let Katsuki go to Kimi's place that evening, because maybe then the pain that would have resulted from that might have starved him off. But instead, he digs himself into a deeper hole by having Katsuki stay, because now he gets to hear that voice a little longer, see those eyes a little closer, and spend the rest of the evening sitting on Izuku's comforter talking. The fact that they could just do this, and it felt like it was enough, only made Izuku more doomed. The sun went down, but neither Izuku nor Katsuki felt like getting up to turn on a lamp, so the bluish-purple dusk of Issei settled into the bedroom until Izuku could barely see their shadows on the walls. Izuku sits up against the pillows and the headboard, while Katsuki lays spread out on his blankets. And when he drifts to sleep later on, he doesn't even realize, but when Izuku wakes up the next morning, he was tucked into bed with the blankets covering him, although he knew for a fact that he had fallen asleep sitting up against the wall. Katsuki had gone back home, but the thought warmed Izuku's heart to know that the blonde stayed with him until the end of their night, because Izuku knew Katsuki most definitely didn't have to. It is Thursday when Izuku sees the blonde again, and it is at the athlete's solo practice. Izuku was a little late today, not that he had a deadline or anything, because of some things he had to take care of for the spring dance. The greenette hasn't even asked his mother about attending yet, mostly because he knows she disapproves of Issei High's spring dance, which was notorious for being a little wild, especially the after parties. Either way, Izuku practically ran to the field with a bottle of cherry Gatorade in his hand, and when he pushes the chain-linked gate open and hurries to his spot near the bench, Izuku sees that Katsuki is very immersed in his practice today, considering that the first regionals tournament is on Saturday. The blonde honestly didn't need to, since he will sweep the tournament easily, but Izuku admires the effort. It seems like at the current moment, Katsuki had the bar set at 7'11", the same height it was Izuku had seen him fail in the backyard the other day, and from the look of it, Katsuki hadn't made any improvement with clearing the bar. Izuku sits down, pulls out his notebook, and starts to take in more details about Katsuki's form, footwork, and whatever else he watches the blonde do while he runs. Izuku keeps a tally chart in his corner of his page of how many times during the practice that Katsuki fails the bar. Currently, it was at 23, and Izuku wonders how long a person could practice like this for so long in this heat. Since no one else was there, Katsuki had to reset the bar manually each time. Izuku watched as Katsuki attempts to clear 7'11" over and over, only to land on the mat with his back and the bar falling at his feet. The expression on Katsuki's face was unreadable. His fiery red eyes were focused on the bar and nothing else, but Izuku could tell that there was something brewing underneath the mask of indifference, because after all, Katsuki was human, even if it didn't sometimes feel like it. Today felt a little more tense, As Izuku sat there watching, he could see that the more times Katsuki knocks down the bar, the tenser the blonde seems to be. The tightness in his shoulders and legs doesn't help with the jump, and Izuku witnesses Katsuki redo his runs over and over again. And now, as Katsuki prepares to go for another, Izuku could practically see the veins threatening to burst through the blonde's forehead. His grip on the pole seems tighter, his breath more rigid, and all the signs pointed towards the fact that the athlete was frustrated. And yet, on Katsuki's face was blankness, feigning determination even though his body was worn out. And when he misses this one, Katsuki slams his hand on the mat, and it looked like the string inside his head snapped. The blonde grabbed the pole roughly and walks over to the bench where Izuku sat. "Can you go home?" Katsuki, for the first time ever since Izuku started dropping by, demand, voice laced with tension. Katsuki's tone felt like it was on the verge of yelling, but he was trying to keep himself nonchalant. Izuku should have known better to feel offended. Furrowing his brows, Izuku then asked the blonde, "Why? So you can let out your frustration where no one can see?" Izuku probably shouldn't have said that. The athlete's blank expression broke for a moment as he looked surprised and then angry. "And what the fuck do you know, Deku?" Since it wasn't too late, Izuku continues anyway. "Kachan, I've watched you fail that bar over 30 times today, and I don't think any differently about you," Izuku tried to explain softly. "This isn't about you, fucking idiot." Katsuki had a warning tone, and the grip on his pole looked bruising. Izuku looked at him straight in the eye. "Then why do I have to leave?" Katsuki couldn't find words to reply to this, but his eyes still shone with anger. "Just fucking leave! I don't want to," Izuku nervously said. "Do you think I haven't seen you not clear a bar before? Kachan, I stood on the other side of the fence when you were 11 and watched you barely make it past 9 feet. "That was fucking different," Katsuki argued. "Then, no one had fucking expectations for me." "And you think I do now?" Izuku asked, hands on his lap. "Deku, you have a goddamn shelf with my jersey, my newspaper clippings, my pictures on it," Katsuki called out. "And you're telling me you don't have expectations for me? Bullshit! Get the fuck out of my sight." "That's not why I have those things," Izuku frowned. "And since when did you care about what I think, or what other people think?" "I don't," Katsuki gave out his formulated response. "I just don't need people to be on my ass when I disappoint them. Nothing annoys the shit out of me more than seeing those disgusting sad eyes when I don't perform or act how people fucking want me to." Izuku shook his head. "The people who care about you won't be disappointed. I don't need a fucking lecture right now, Deku." Katsuki threw down his pole. He looked at Izuku for another couple of seconds, now clearly frustrated eyes, before stepping away. He walked off to the landing mat before sitting down on it and clasped his hands together, staring down between his feet before up at the bar that he couldn't pass. Izuku stared at the sight of the athlete from his spot on the bench and wondered how Katsuki could handle everything by himself for so long. He thought back to what Mitsuki had said. His parents don't bother anymore. It was just how Katsuki was, and no matter how frustrated the blonde gets, he still gets through it and handles every situation himself. But Izuku was beginning to wonder whether Katsuki's version of handling things was actually dealing with his emotions, or if it was waiting it out until he doesn't feel anything anymore. Izuku then realizes that this type of nonchalant acceptance of Katsuki's emotional disconnection came from everyone, not just his parents. Katsuki's teachers, teammates, friends, and basically everyone had just accepted the fact that Katsuki was like this, and so they don't bother anymore. Izuku felt hurt inside at the realization, because although completely different, the greenet had experienced a similar kind of treatment. He's always been a little bit inside his shell, as long as he remembered. His mother had been strict with his going out, and it wasn't as if he's been left out, but many people didn't bother anymore. Even his closer friends felt hesitant and rarely made plans with him, assuming that he wouldn't be able to go. In a way, sometimes Izuku felt as if his life was passing him by, and he watched everyone else grow up and do things all teenagers do while sitting in the confines of his room. And none of that changed until Bakudeku came into the picture, did not give a shit about his mother's restrictions, and made it possible for him to reclaim all the years he lost. Katsuki was probably the only person who had ever bothered, even if it was just because of a project. Now suddenly, Izuku decides that he won't just be a statistic. He won't just accept that this is how Katsuki is, even if it's meddling in places where he shouldn't. Grabbing the drink from his bench, the greenette walks over slowly to where Katsuki was sitting and plopped down next to him. Katsuki's head was down, but he accepted the cherry drink when it was passed to him. "You need to take a break from today," Izuku quietly mentioned. "Your body's getting worn out." Katsuki says nothing to this, just unscrews the cap of Gatorade and takes a gulp, before sitting in silence once more. Izuku swings his legs above the edge of the mat, thinking of what to say. "I read about a guy who can clear 18-2, Izuku stated, knowing this probably wasn't what the other wanted to hear. "It's true. Not just a rumor. I've watched him, too, in videos. He's good, and I think his name is Toro, and he's from Tokyo?" Izuku just decides to keep talking. "He's not your age, by the way. He's 2 years older, but he'll be competing in your division if you qualify for nationals." Izuku keeps swinging his legs. In his peripheral vision, Katsuki holds the drink in his hands but doesn't move. This conversation might go very wrong very soon. "I probably watched about a dozen videos of him vaulting. I get a little obsessed," Izuku laughs. "But honestly, if someone were to ask me who I'd predict to be better by the time nationals come, I wouldn't hesitate to say you. And that's not me being biased." Katsuki turns his head slightly to peer over at Izuku, and the greenette smiles at him gently. Izuku then looks back down at his feet. "When I watch him, Ito I mean, I know he's good and looks and acts like he grew up with everything a big city has to offer, with private lessons from the best coaches in the country and high-end physical therapists to treat his every bruise." Izuku stated his observations. He continued, "But, as arrogant as you are, you're a small-town boy from a high school that no one outside of Issei has ever heard of, unless it's connected to your name. You taught yourself how to vault up until now. You got the low-key coach you do now, and collected all the bruises on your arms, sides, and legs, and your head, and treated it all yourself with some ointment and bandages from our corner store." Katsuki was by no means poor. If anything, the blonde was upper middle class, and lived very comfortably even if they weren't millionaires. But when you live in a town as small as Issei, regardless of wealth, there just isn't going to be many opportunities for dreamers. The best coaches, the best private gyms, physicians, and whatnot were not going to be in Issei, and so Katsuki had to work so much harder than others to get to the place he was now. "You're so determined and passionate that it takes my breath away. Am I allowed to say that?" Izuku laughs. "I don't mean it in a weird way, but yeah, I don't doubt for a second that you are the best." Katsuki didn't say anything for a while, and Izuku was okay with that. He just felt like filling in the silence just with a little insight as to why he believed in the others so much. It wasn't baseless. It never was. And when Katsuki finally replied, it was gruff, but not aggressive in the slightest. "Cheesy bastard. How are you not embarrassed saying shit like that out loud?" Izuku giggled out loud, watching the clouds turn orange. "I am a little bit," he admits. And then, after a moment of silence, Katsuki looks up to the bar and tells Izuku, "I'm fucking nervous. Is that what you wanted me to admit?" Izuku turns his head to the blonde, surprised with wide eyes, and his mouth parts slightly as he thinks of what to say. He wasn't expecting anything like that to actually come out of the blonde's mouth. Izuku swallowed. "I want you to want to admit it." Katsuki rolled his eyes, but didn't look malicious. "I'm good as I am, Deku. You're trying to do something, I can tell. I'm taking psychology too, you know, nerd." And then he shrugs. "That's all I'm going to say about it. I'm nervous. That's it. I'll get over it." Izuku was happy enough for now. Admitting is the first step. The greenette then thinks and hums. When you're nervous, I read that you should just do an activity to make your brain focus on something entirely different. Although it's just rec badminton, I sometimes get nervous too, and I like to whistle a song. It makes me focus on what note comes next, and calms my nerves down a little so I'm not as tense. Katsuki snorts at this. What song? Izuku grins. The chorus to Nothing's Going to Change My Love for You. By George Benson? Katsuki laughs at him. My god, you're so fucking cheesy. It's a beautiful song! Izuku elbows him, then sways in his seat side to side before beginning to whistle the tune. Izuku's whistling wasn't great, but the melody was there. The song was in fact beautiful, and Izuku has always imagined himself in a movie montage to this song when it comes and plays on his playlist or the radio. Katsuki's shoulders shook from laughing on the side as Izuku tried to get in the moment. Finish it! Izuku poked the athlete. Katsuki shakes his head. I'm not fucking doing that. No way. The greenette begins to harass Katsuki a little more, elbowing him repeatedly as Izuku repeats the part of the chorus leading up to where he wanted Katsuki to finish. Fuck, Katsuki defended himself. Go away, goddammit. Izuku refused. Not until you finish the tune. Izuku sings it half-assed. Nothing's gonna change my love for you. You ought to know by now how much I love you. One thing you can be sure of, I'll never ask for more than your love. Izuku drags out the end as his hands gestured for Katsuki to finish in a whistle. Finally giving in, Katsuki rolls his eyes before taking a breath and whistling the rest of the chorus, to which Izuku clapped. Katsuki's lung capacity was much better than his, so he was able to go on without taking a breath between each line. At one point, Katsuki paused to think over the next note before he continued to whistle. When he finished, Izuku cheered. See? You have to actively think about what was next, so it helps with your nerves, right? Katsuki flicked him on the other side of his head. I'm not doing that. Izuku pouted. It works, but fine. Just be there to cheer me on, Katsuki told him. And I'll drag you goons too. I want a huge crowd. A giant banner saying I'm the fucking best. And a whole band. Izuku shook his head and laughed. Okay, now you're just being greedy. Katsuki's left side of his lip quirked up. Just the first thing is fine, too. Izuku rests his cheek on his hand and looks over to Katsuki with smiling eyes. Why does it sound like I'm a good luck charm? Katsuki stood up and stretched. It's your shitty aura. It scares all the competition away. Izuku looked for a pebble to throw at the athlete, and then decides on something. He pursed his lips before requesting the blonde. Hey, can we drop by my house real quick? Katsuki had seen the slight pause and gave Izuku a weird look before shrugging. Sure. When Katsuki parks his car on Izuku's driveway, the greenette looked as if though he was thinking of something embarrassing. And when they entered the adobe, Inka was talking on the phone with a customer in her room, so there was no need to sit through any small talk. Izuku led Katsuki up to his room. Behind him on the stairs, the blonde asked, Why are we here again? Izuku nervously laughed. I have something to give you. Oh? Katsuki spoke. For what do I owe the pleasure? Izuku scratched the back of his head. You're not even gonna like it. When they enter his room, Izuku walks towards the shelf of things he has related to Katsuki, while the blonde plopped back on the bed. Izuku scans the shelf before taking out the little cardboard box that situated itself on the corner. Oi, ain't that the thing you told me not to touch when I first came in here? Katsuki noticed. Izuku smiled as he looked down at it. Yeah, I never planned on actually giving it to you. Katsuki raised a brow from the bed. How long have you had that thing? Izuku looked over at Katsuki and confessed. 7 years. The blonde seemed off at the comment, but then asked, What is it? Izuku then looked extremely shy. I'm suddenly not sure anymore. It's really stupid and... Oi, Katsuki interrupted his ramblings. Just show me. Izuku pursed his lips and then took off the lid of the cardboard box, and from the raggedy inside he pulls out a white sports headband with absolutely horrible writing and doodles on it, before tossing it at Katsuki aggressively and stepping back. Katsuki fishes it out of his lap and holds the sweatband in his hand so that he can see the writing, staring down at it while Izuku watches. The white sweatband looked as if it had been collecting dust, in terrible handwriting and in bright orange and green letters, which were Katsuki's favorite colors when he was young. The words, "Izuku believes in me," were embarrassingly scribbled, and on the side 2 stick figures of someone with green hair, which Katsuki assumed was Izuku, and then someone with spiky blonde hair, and on the other side a terrible doodle of someone vaulting a high bar. Izuku stammered, "I made it when I was 11 and you first started vaulting. I wanted to give it to you at your first tournament for good luck, but you still didn't want to talk to me then, so it's just been sitting here for a while." Katsuki still held the item in his hand, then peered up at Izuku, who was standing by awkwardly. "You don't expect me to wear this, do you?" "Yes, as a good luck charm," Izuku laughs. "Probably not on your head, because that's embarrassing, but just keep it on you." Katsuki looked back down at the garment, and Izuku swore he saw the blonde crack a genuine smile for a second. But then the athlete looked up at him again. "I feel very lucky now, nerd." "Now you have to wear it, okay?" Izuku pushed. Katsuki rolled his eyes, then wrapped the sweatband twice around his wrist, with the lettering facing inside out, so that it can't be seen from the outside. "There, you happy?" Izuku noticed the lettering was flipped with the inverted sweatband and chuckles. "Am I that embarrassing?" Katsuki stood up to ruffle Izuku's hair. "A little bit, yeah." Izuku tilted his head up to look at the much taller boy, always feeling a bit small when next to Katsuki. "Are you going to go home now?" Katsuki didn't hear him, and instead had looked over to the shelf. "Oi!" Izuku looks over there as well. "Yes?" Katsuki then looked down at Izuku. "You have all this shit of me?" He gestured to the shelf. "And you're trying to tell me you don't got expectations for me. What kind of fan are you?" Izuku blinked up at him, not expecting that question at all. His lips parted as he tries to find a way to say it accurately as possible why exactly he's so invested in Katsuki without having expectations. If Katsuki were to stay at 7'10" for the rest of his life, Izuku would still be okay with that. "As someone who is always on the ground," Izuku smiles, "seeing you fly, no matter how high, is good enough for me." At this response, Katsuki looked at him with an odd expression, and Izuku wondered if he had said something wrong. The greenette was about to speak up when Katsuki beat him to the chase. "You know Humphrey Park?" Katsuki then asked. "The one with the small pond that everyone comes to feed those filthy ducks at?" Izuku was confused, but nodded. "Yes?" "Meet me there in 40 minutes, Katsuki said as he walked to the door, "and change into something less restrictive. I'm gonna go home and grab some shit." "Wait, what?" Izuku asked. "In 40 minutes?" Katsuki nodded as he headed out the door. "Sneak out if you have to." "But, Izuku started, but the blonde was already heading down the stairs. 40 minutes was not that much time, Izuku realizes, because the park was about a 15-minute jog away, and he still had to eat dinner and change. Realizing that, Izuku rushes downstairs and into the kitchen just as his mother leaves her room. He greeted her, and while she heated up dinner, Izuku wondered what it was Katsuki wanted to do. And then they sat down to eat. Izuku practically shoved his food in his mouth, chiming in here and there to his mother's conversation, but overall rushing. He practically runs up the stairs when he's done, before changing into some athletic shorts, and kept the same t-shirt he'd been wearing on. Making sure there was nothing in his teeth, Izuku stomped back downstairs and slipped on his shoes. Inko, who was washing the dishes, calls out, "Izuku, where are you going?" "To Humphrey Park," Izuku tells her. "I'm meeting Kacchan there in a couple of minutes." "The park?" She paused, her washing concerned. "Now? But you haven't even asked." "Sorry, Mom, I have to go," Izuku tells her with a large wave as he rushed towards the door. Inko puts down the plate and briskly walks over to him. "Izuku!" The boy in question turns around as his hands are about to close the door. "Yes?" Fuck, he had completely forgotten that his mother wasn't the type to just let him go out. How he had forgotten, he didn't know. Inko looked overly concerned and almost a bit panicked. "You haven't even asked me yet, or told me when you'll be back." The comment sparked something in Izuku's mind, and he asked himself why he had to give her every single detail of his life, when most people at this age were allowed to take control of their own lives. All his friends next year will be in a different city than their parents, so why did it matter where he went or when he'll be back as long as he was taking care of himself? Izuku thought back to Katsuki's question back at the ice cream parlor. "Do you ever think about this, Deku? When did she start acting like this? Did a certain fucking event happen?" Some theories go through his head, but it was so mean, and Izuku forced himself to defend himself. But be calm. Izuku looked at her apologetically. "I don't know when I'll be back tonight. Can I go?" Inko looked at him as if he's grown a third head, and softly told him, "No. You can ask again another day, but tonight you've overstepped your boundaries. Now go back inside and tell Katsuki, Mom, I'm going," Izuku told her gently, and before the woman, whose eyes widened, could protest, he started jogging off. Behind him he heard a frantic "Izuku!" but he ignored her, making it the first time he's done so. "About time." Katsuki leaned against his car at the park entrance when Izuku jogged up. The greenette stopped a couple feet away and put his hands on his knees to catch his breath. "I'm not even late, Kachan." Katsuki got himself off the car. "I can't believe you can't even fucking drive." "Speaking of," Katsuki said as he reached into the side of his door to grab something, "did Auntie actually give you last-minute permission, or did you sneak out?" Izuku pursed his lips, not really wanting to think about that right now. "Neither." Katsuki turned back to look at him curiously, not understanding, but shrugging. "All right, come on." Izuku walked behind Katsuki as he led the way to the park. "What are we doing?" Humphreys Park was quaint and a multi-purpose area. There weren't many trees, and it was mostly paved out anyways. A small pond with ducks was on the left, and pieces of bread that the birds don't eat were on the ground. There was a playground that some kids were enjoying at the moment, a Little League baseball practice field that was empty at the moment, some walking trails, and further back was an open tall grass field with a wide dirt area that connected to the park. Katsuki walked towards the wide dirt area, and now Izuku could see, sitting in the middle of it with tall grass field in the back, was a practice pole vault set up. Except it seemed like it was for beginners because the maximum the bar went up to was about 12 feet. The landing mat looked worn with age and the sun beating down on it, but it held up. The running track was just a dirt area, and Izuku looked up at Katsuki to see why they were there. The blonde then pulled out his small Bluetooth speaker and set it on the ground nearby, before connecting his phone. After turning on Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper, he shoved his phone in his pocket again. From a large box next to the pole vault pit, Katsuki walked up and fished around for poles. There were about 10 or so fiberglass poles in there for communal use. The blonde picked out a shorter one that he would use, and came back to where Izuku stood confused. Then, from the bag Katsuki brought, he took out some white athletic tape and began to wrap the part of the pole that's supposed to be gripped onto without a word. Izuku just watched. Then Katsuki shoved the pole into Izuku's hands and walked behind the greenette to hold it up in the correct positioning. "Kachan?" Izuku turned his neck to look back at the blonde, who was right behind him with his arms around his body, helping Izuku hold the pole. "What are you doing?" The athlete changed the grip placement on Izuku's left hand before looking down at Izuku's eyes and telling him straight. Izuku's never found the color of red so beautiful. As Katsuki says, "Showing you how to fly." Izuku was stunned. What? First of all, the blonde's voice was uncharacteristically non-aggressive. Secondly, he was not prepared for this at all. After years and years of watching from a distance, now the blonde wants to take him off the ground? "You're what?" Izuku blinked up at him with big eyes, and Katsuki didn't look away until a moment later. "Turn back around." Katsuki nodded his head forward. "You're going to want to hold the pole up at this angle," he said before moving it. Izuku still wasn't over it, turning his head back around to look up at Katsuki. Wait, we're actually doing this? Kachan, it's one thing to analyze your movement, and another thing to actually do it. I don't know the first thing about actually pole vaulting. I'll fall on my head. Are you sure you can teach Katsuki let go of what he was stabilizing the pole and used one hand to gently take hold of Izuku's jaw and turn his head over to look at the vault pit. Listen, we're starting at 7 feet. That's the absolute beginner height. See? A kid could do it. He makes Izuku look. You'll be fine. Trust me, nerd. You said you were always on the ground, right? I'll show you how to fly. Trust me. That was, once upon a time, much more difficult for Izuku. But now, as he feels secure in front of Katsuki, and the boy tells him that he'll be okay, Izuku listens to the lyrics a bit closer. If you fall, I will catch you. I'll be waiting, time after time. And takes a small breath before telling the other, okay. Alright, Katsuki began. So as I was saying, hold it at this angle. You're not going to be able to keep it there for your first few times, but you'll get a hang of it. It'll be easier. And Katsuki lifts the pole to the angle described. Izuku feels heat from where the blonde was surrounding his smaller body, trying to get himself in the right position. His hips were moved, and he looked down to see those large hands holding on to him. You keep your feet like this, right? Izuku moved his feet to a position he knew Katsuki began with often. Katsuki looked down, and in slight surprise, nods. Right. Lift your left heel up a little bit more. It turns out pole vaulting is absolutely difficult. Izuku would think that it'd be easier, because he knew all the mechanisms. He knew the methodology and all the techniques, but to apply them is a different story. It honestly gave him an even greater respect for pole vaulters, because it has been well over an hour since they've started, and Izuku has not managed to successfully clear the 7 feet bar. The amount of effort and control this sport took was insane. And also, sorry to break character, but I used to do pole vault. Guys, I literally passed 6 feet once. I never even passed 7 feet. Like, it's so hard. I only did it for a year, but it's really hard. Anyways, back to the story. Katsuki was surprisingly a good teacher, despite the excessive use of language and laughing every time Izuku failed to land the bar. Despite that, the blonde always reset it for him every time and told him to keep going until he makes one. Izuku put his hands on his knees and looked over to Katsuki, who was sitting on the dirt. How do you do this? He asked out of breath. Katsuki grinned. Exactly how I told you. Izuku threw his head back and groaned. Ugh! How many tries did it take for you to clear 7 feet your first time? At this, the athlete looks smug as he reveals 2. 2? Izuku borderline yelled. This is impossible. Katsuki then got up and over to where Izuku was. It's possible, nerd. You have the core and upper body strength for it. You're a little on the short side too, so it's a bit harder, but it'll work. Katsuki then slapped Izuku's stomach. I'm telling you, right when the pole vault hits the vault box, put all your energy into your core. Just imagine yourself as a slingshot or some other shit. Izuku just stares at him with disbelief before deciding to trust the process. Katsuki made it sound so easy. He brings the pole vault back into position and grips where the tape is. His hands are already feeling sore from holding the pole, which was heavier than he had anticipated. Getting his feet into position, he took a deep breath. He thought of Katsuki, and those few seconds where the blonde is in the air, where he's so amazing that he blocks the sun and mesmerizes a crowd. He's always wondered what that felt like, ever since he saw Katsuki jump for the first time. Today he was determined to find out. Opening his eyes, Izuku broke into a sprint, mimicking the way Katsuki would start out. He knew from his notes that Katsuki sprinted for 8 seconds and ran for another 8 before he reached the launch box. And so Izuku counted. He transitioned from a run into a sprint and counted to 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He pushed the pole into the launch box, and it bent deeply. And right as it bent to its highest, Izuku pushed off the ground with as much force as he could, before transferring all of his momentum into his core to lift it up. This was different. This was going to work. Izuku's eyes widened as his body continued lifting up from the pool, straightening up again, and then suddenly he felt it. From every crevice of his brain to the tips of his fingers, he felt it. He was flying. It was probably a couple seconds in total, but in that moment, When he was launched into the air, Izuku's body seemed to float towards the sky, and the world seemed so big, but it felt as if he could reach out for the clouds and they'd be there at the end of his fingertips. He could see nothing in his peripheral, so it was all clouds and blue sky. What was it on Katsuki's back? A hawk? Yeah, he understood it a bit more now. He felt incredible. Izuku lets go of the pole, and he clears the bar. When he lands, he does so on his back, and instead of getting up, Izuku just lays there, staring back up at the sky, his chest going up and down to get air, but he was so happy. He felt so happy. Is this what Katsuki saw every day, except 10 feet higher up? Izuku heard clapping from the side and a woo! Katsuki approached and jumps up onto the mat, standing over him. Oi, look you go, Deku! You fucking cleared it! Took you long enough. Izuku sees Katsuki in his vision, and against the beautiful sky, Katsuki is the foreground. The blonde looked down at him, and Izuku could stare at those eyes, those lips that grin every single day, and not get sick of it. He was beautiful. And it's that thought that would normally scare him, but right now, all Izuku could think was, this boy that taught me how to fly. Katsuki had taken him up in the sky with him, and he realizes this. That was when he feels it. The flutters, again, but this time stronger, more in his face. He couldn't stop it, and he feels panic coming up. But before he could, Katsuki sits down and lays back so that they were both staring up at the setting sky. How was it? Katsuki asked. Pretty fucking sick, huh? Izuku, still stunned from the experience and shocked from the flutters, let out a soft, It was beautiful, Kachan. Isn't it? Katsuki affirmed. You want to get a hawk tattoo now? Izuku laughed at this, but he felt like crying. God, he felt like crying. These flutters, they just won't go away. I'll think about it, Izuku jokes back, then nudges Katsuki. Hey, Katsuki hums. What is it? I'm obviously not an expert or anything, Izuku begins, but I do know a good amount of sports physics, and you know how you sprint for 8 seconds, then run for 8? Katsuki nods. I don't even remember telling you that, but yeah, fucking stalker. Izuku shakes his head. I'm not, but anyways, if you're willing to try it sometime, I think it'd be good to test out sprinting for about 10 seconds and running for 6. Katsuki snorts. You're going to tell me, a national youth champion, how to pole vault, Deku. Izuku smiles. No, but you can try it if you like. Not at the next tournament, of course, but maybe during practice. I think shortening your run time by just a little bit will put more power into your vault. But that's just me theorizing. Katsuki seems to ponder it, and then after a moment tells him, I'll see. Izuku gets up not too long afterwards and tries again about 6 times. He managed to get it about half of the time, which was good enough now that he had the general technique down. And when Izuku gets dropped off later that night in Katsuki's car, he walked past his mother's closed door and straight up the stairs to where he locked himself in his room and headed straight for the shower. As he then stands under the trickling streams of warm water, Izuku clutches his chest, which aches at the thought of Katsuki, and squeezed his eyes shut. Even the thumping of the water on his skin wasn't enough to mask the rate that his heart was beating at as he reminds himself of the blonde's face standing above him after he cleared the bar. Of all people, why did it have to be him? Of all people, why did it have to be the one person who would never ever want to feel the same? Izuku has not completely come to terms with it, but he knows it's only a matter of time. He can only deny it for so long. To add to Izuku's conflicted emotions, the next morning was absolute shit. Izuku should have seen it coming, considering how bad he left off with his mother the day before. When he left for the park, it was the very first time that Izuku would say he's directly defied something his mother said. Although Izuku would say he wasn't rude about it, he should have remembered coming home that night that there will be consequences. At breakfast, Izuku found himself sitting across from his mother awkwardly. She was barely eating, hands settled on the smooth mahogany table, her eggs and bread laid there getting cold by the minute. The only sound was Izuku cautiously eating his food and sipping from his water here and there. He tried looking at his mother, but she simply stared blankly somewhere on the table. Izuku wonders if her not eating was a way to make him feel guilty, or if she was genuinely so upset that it ruined her appetite. Izuku knew he should apologize, but when thinking back to the moment yesterday evening when it felt like he touched the clouds that he's always saw Katsuki flying through, he couldn't bring himself to. Finally, after about 15 minutes of eating in silence, Inko speaks up, her voice calm, but her face looking as if Izuku had come home from doing meth. "Izuku, honey," Inko said, and the boy in question looked up from his nearly finished breakfast, internally nervous. He just smiled at her to show he has no negative intentions. "Yes, Mom? Are you not going to apologize for yesterday?" she asked, searching his expression. "You made me so worried." Izuku held her gaze, and wished she wouldn't ask him such a question. He played with his utensils. "I'm sorry for worrying you. Nothing else." It didn't look like the answer Inko wanted, but she just sighed and palmed her temple. "Izuku, I've made a decision about something, and I need you to understand why." Izuku's heart began racing. Was she going to go through with tracking on his phone? He asked. "Yes?" Inko looked falsely apologetic as she tells him. "I've already been thinking about this one thing for a while, because I just hate it so much. And with what happened yesterday, it really solidified to me that you need to put more boundaries on what's going on in this house." Izuku waits for her to get to the point. He's not touching his food anymore either. The beautiful sunny morning rays coming through in their windows was starting to be ruined by the bitter aftertaste of this conversation. "And," she looked conflicted and hurt, "and I never thought I'd have to say this to you, Izuku. You've never been like this, so keen to leave all the time and step out of line. What happened to the Izuku who hung out with his mama as she works and cooks? Who watches movies every night with me?" Izuku brought his hands up to his face and rested his elbows on the table as he whispered, "Mom, please stop." She continued, voice so hurt. "What happened to the Izuku who understood what was safe and what wasn't? Who listened to his mom's words? I barely recognize you anymore." Izuku didn't move from his position, but his voice was breaking. "What about me do you not recognize, Mom? I'm still the same person. I'm still your boy." He looked up at her then, eyes watering at her words. "I still watch movies with you, hang out with you. I'm being safe. I don't understand. What do you not recognize?" And then his voice quietened. "Your lapdog?" At this, Inko's eyes widened, and she goes silent for a good minute. The atmosphere in the house was completely stale, as if someone had sucked the moisture out of the entire place so it was dry and uncomfortable. Izuku probably should have not said that, but hearing her make him out to be some kind of monster hurt more than anything. She tried acting as if things needed to always stay the same. If there was any change, it indicated that Izuku loved her less. "You will never say that again, Izuku," Inko responds quietly. "You are my son. It's always been me and you. You're the only person that I have, and I care about you. That's why I am the way I am." Izuku was so sick of that reasoning, but he forced himself to be calm and not get angry at her. They sat in silence for another few minutes. At this point, Izuku was playing around with his fork, trying to level himself. Izuku then asked, "You know the VHS tape you keep in the attic from when you were growing up?" Inko blinked at him. "Yes?" Izuku looked at her with bright eyes and a sad smile. "When I was in middle school, I'd go up there and take some time to watch them." He glanced back down. "'Cause you never talked about Dad. All I had were faint memories of him taking me out to ice cream, the beach, and wherever else he felt like going." Inko's eyes widened. "Izuku, I put those away for a reason. We don't need to be reminiscing on. You and him looked so cool back in high school." Izuku laughed gently, but he was on the verge of tears. "He was always so adventurous, wasn't he?" "Too adventurous." Inko's voice sounded strained. "Too much that he never knew how to settle. Mom, when are you gonna tell me why he left us?" Izuku asked her, hands almost shaking under the table. "Because as the days go by, I'm coming up with my own theories." "I don't want to hear them." Her voice sounded final, although she didn't raise her pitch a bit. "I'm not going to talk about him, We're here to talk about you, Izuku. Izuku wanted to argue, to say that the two subjects were late, but he saw something in his mother's eyes that told him that she was not having it. When they argue, it always felt like this, so tense, never any yelling, never shouting and screaming, just this quiet, suppressed and dangerous aura, where he felt like he was going to have to tiptoe not to get seriously upset or make her seriously upset. I'm not allowing you to attend the spring dance, Inko said. That is my decision. Izuku blinked at her and felt absolutely confused. What did that have to do with anything? But I'm planning it. You're planning the catering part of it, she corrected. There's no need for you to actually attend. I already called up to the school yesterday to inform them that you have matters at home that night. If you try to do what you did yesterday and go anyways, the attending adults there will text me right away. You what? Izuku stared at her. She's never gone so far before. This was borderline insane. He asked, but why? Because you need to understand boundaries, Izuku. Inko reached over for his hand, cupping them into hers. Izuku felt sick, feeling her warm skin on his. Actions have consequences. Not only that, but I've never wanted you to go. From the moment you entered high school. I've heard the spring dance was too wild, too crazy. I don't need my son attending something like that. Instead, I think it'd be nicer if he stayed home with me and we can watch some movies and have some bonding time to make up for everything. She tried to pad the punishment. Izuku was silent. It wasn't as if the dance was the most important thing in the world, but it was a basic thing that most teenagers his age would be allowed to attend. He already had little daydreams of the music playing, what he was going to wear, the memories he'd come home with. He was a senior, for goodness sake. The spring dance was for seniors, and something people look forward to their entire time at Issei High. Izuku just stared at her, unknowing of what to say. Izuku? Inko asked as if she didn't just drop a bomb. Can you say something? Izuku then began laughing lightly and smiled at her. Mom, what do you want me to say? Inko didn't have a response. Izuku looked at her funny. What did she want him to say? Hug her? Tell her that she's completely right and be grateful? Izuku was grateful for many things. It was how he was raised, but this? Izuku got up, dishes in hands. I'll stay home. As if he had a choice. Izuku wonders why he couldn't bring himself to say anything else, to make her change her mind. Had she conditioned him that much to the point that he couldn't get truly rebellious if he tried? When Izuku leaves the house to go to school that morning after the horrible encounter, he felt even more pathetic for responding to her "have a good day at school" with a false and happy "thank you." The fact that cheerfulness was his automatic reaction, no matter how terrible he felt internally, killed him. When Saturday's regional tournament comes around, Izuku rides with Shoto to the event. Thank God his mother didn't restrict him from going to tournaments, or else he would actually have lost it, because being in the stands looking out onto the track field as dozens of athletes prepare in their white tents grabbing concession snacks in preparation was something he's been doing for years. When he was little, Inko would take him to see Katsuki, and he's been going ever since. I'm gonna go grab some food. I want a hot dog. Shoto nudged him as they weaved through the crowd outside the mid-sized stadium. You want anything? Izuku turned to his friend. Can you get me a water and nachos, please? No jalapenos. Got it. I'll find you. Shoto nods before heading off towards the concession stands. Izuku walked past the gate that led inside and stood on his tiptoes to look for the entrance up to the outdoor stands. There were a fair amount of people, considering that a good number of the schools from several counties in the region were competing. The results were practically guaranteed for Katsuki to win, and everyone knew it. From the side, Izuku felt a nudge, and he looked up to see Kaido. The brunette was already in uniform, and he smiled down at Izuku. Midoriya, you came to cheer me on today? He laughs. Izuku grins up at him. Of course, I wish the best of luck to the team. He puts a thumbs up. Kaido chuckles and holds out his arm. Are you trying to find the bleachers? Yeah. Izuku looked around. The stadium is different from the one they usually hold the first regionals tournament at. Izuku lightly holds onto Kaido's arm for politeness, even though he could very well just follow the other without doing so, and the athlete weaves through the crowd and up the stairs until they emerge outside and into the stands. It immediately got loud and bright as they were greeted with sun's heat and excitement from the crowd in the stands. Izuku looked out. Far left were the white tents with each school banner printed on top, and the athletes were huddled underneath, wrapping their hands, drinking sport drinks, and stretching. Issei's high tent was right in the middle, and Izuku could see their coach running around with a clipboard to each vaulter. The track field was large, and the bar was already set at the starting height. "It's my third time attending regionals, and I'm still nervous," Kaido chuckled as he looked out onto the stadium. Izuku assures him, "You'll be fine, Kaido." "I'd say about half the team makes it to the second regionals tournament every year," Kaido states. "Since this is my last year, I'm pretty determined to make it in that half." Izuku nods and wishes him luck. "Just focus on that goal, and I know you'll do great." "Thanks," the boy smiles, and fishes something out from his gym bag. "Hey, you said you'd cheer me on, right?" Izuku shakes his head. "Of course." Pulling out a jersey with his name on the back, Kaido hands it over to Izuku. "I think this should fit. I think I'd work a little bit harder if I know this cutie is wearing this for me." The boy winks at him. Izuku's lips parted as he slowly takes the jersey. "You were planning this, weren't you?" Kaido laughs. "I did. Is that embarrassing? You're still gonna wear it, right?" The greenette smiles while rolling his eyes and slipped the jersey on top of his white shirt. "Since you tried so hard, I'll wear it." "Great." Kaido nods in success. "Hey, I gotta get back to the crew now, but I'll be looking out for you, alright?" Izuku waves bye to him. "Good luck!" When Shoto comes over to the bleachers with food in hand and notices the change in attire, the mixed hair boy gives Izuku a look, to which the greenette merely shrugged. The tournament was fun, as it usually was. Issei High sent up one representative at a time, and so far he hadn't seen Katsuki. Izuku made sure to notice the other teams too, since he wasn't just interested in Katsuki, but the whole sport. The crowd from Issei High was the largest, since pole vault was the school's pride and joy. They definitely were that crowd that annoyed everybody else, but none of them cared. When it was Kaido's turn to go up, Izuku made sure to cheer and get his friends too also. But since the boy was already popular, he had no problems getting cheers. His performance was actually incredible, and Izuku was happy for him. Kaido maxes out at 1 inch above his previous record, which earned a large whoop from the crowd. However, there was one person who Izuku knew would hold his attention completely. And after a couple more people, Bakugo Katsuki was up. Immediately, the crowd roared. After all, it was the legendary pole vaulter. It was in moments like these where Izuku realizes how insanely popular Katsuki was. Everyone, even from other schools, knew him. And if they knew him, then they knew that they were about to lose to him. The blonde athlete steps out onto the track, and Izuku felt his heart beating faster again. There he was. His pole vault uniform was tight on his body for aerodynamics, and it hugged every muscle. Katsuki was 6 feet and 4 inches of pure Adonis-like energy, and the power surged through his essence. A look of determination was in those fiery eyes, and Izuku can't describe the happiness he feels when he watches the blonde prepare. Stretching real quick, he steps into the starting area as the announcer begins to give their introduction of Katsuki, as if everyone didn't already know him. And when it was time to actually start the 2-minute limit, the crowd goes silent in anticipation. For many people and other teams, this would be the first time seeing Bakugo Katsuki in action this tournament season. Katsuki stares at the ground in concentration, and Izuku noticed the blonde blowing a breath out of his mouth to focus. Izuku knew he was not nervous, since the max height he's used for the first regional were usually around 15 or 16 feet range. And then Izuku notices, and it brings a small swell of joy in his heart. On Katsuki's left wrist, he had the inverted sweatband wrapped around it like a bracelet cuff. Izuku had expected the blonde to take it off, but there he was, wearing it inside out for a tournament. Izuku wanted to pump his fist in success before watching his runs begin. And of course, Katsuki sweeps the tournament easily. Again, he does not jump near his previous official record. Everyone else maxed out before then, so there was no need for him to vault higher. Every time he cleared a bar, the crowd absolutely loses it, because to hear about a legend and to see a legend in person are two different experiences. Every time he watches, Izuku felt as if it was for the very first time. In the end, an incredible 3/4 of Issei High's pole vault team make it to regionals, and Izuku sees the entire team jumping in together in shared excitement when the results come out. Katsuki was hoisted into the air, and Izuku laughed from afar. The energy was high, and when people began to file out of the stadium at a snail's pace, Izuku and Shoto wait so that they do not get caught up in trying to leave in the intense traffic. And so he and his friends sit there for a while and talked while they wait for it to get a bit more empty. And once most of the traffic left the stadium, that was when Izuku and Shoto began heading down the stairs. "I'm gonna take a shit," Shoto tells him. "That hot dog was not pleasant going down." Izuku snorts. "Take your time," and stands off to the side as he gets on his phone and waits. A couple of people pass him, mostly athletes who are just now packing up and leaving in little groups. The ones that he knows stops to greet him briefly before heading out. Izuku wishes he wasn't waiting for Katsuki, but he definitely was, looking around the corner here and there. And when he finally sees a hint of blonde spiky hair turn a corner, Izuku looks back down at his phone and pretends that he didn't notice. God, he felt so pathetic, and was going to make fun of himself later for this. "Nerd," Katsuki called out, and Izuku felt a little more excited than he wanted to be. Izuku pretended to suddenly look up in surprise. "Kachan!" The athlete was still in uniform, and his gym bag slung over his shoulder as he walked towards the shorter. "Check out this sick trophy." Katsuki unzips his bag really quick so that Izuku could look at the glass trophy, and the green eyes him. "Kachan, I don't think you should shove a glass trophy in your gym bag." The blonde shrugged. "It'll survive, and if not, I have 1,000,000 more." Izuku shook his head at the arrogance. "If you're not going to take care of it, I'll be very happy to adopt the trophy." Katsuki smirked at him. "So you can put it in your little shrine?" Izuku flushed red. "I feel like at this point I should just say yes." "You might as well, shit nerd." Katsuki ruffles his hair before noticing something. With an odd look, Katsuki's hands travel down to the jersey on Izuku's body, and he eyes it before looking back at Izuku. "Who is this?" Izuku looked down at the jersey and had completely forgotten. Still, he glanced back up at Katsuki. "Oh, it's Kaido's. He wanted me to wear it to cheer him on." Katsuki looks off to the side and tongues his cheek. Eyes blank. Izuku looks concerningly up at the taller male, and reaches out for the edge of Katsuki's uniform. "Kachan?" Izuku asked. The blonde then turned to look at him. "Wear mine next time." Izuku blinked up at him. His mouth gaped. He stammered. "What?" "Wear mine next time," Katsuki repeated, eyes staring him down. Izuku was confused. "You want me to actually wear it?" Katsuki had made fun of him for having it in the first place, and now he wanted him to wear it? Izuku stared wide-eyed at the blonde. "Fuck." Katsuki tongued his cheek again, as if holding himself back from saying something, and then stepped forward until he was staring down directly at Izuku. The greenette tilts his head up in surprise, and puts a hand out on Katsuki's chest to keep them from touching so close. But the blonde pushes forward and lifts the jersey slightly. "That fuckface really annoys the shit out of me, you know." Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe, as the intense gaze stays on him. "Kachan, just because he annoys you doesn't mean he annoys me." "I know." The blonde looks off to the side, before moving his gaze back to Izuku's, and then lets go of the jersey. "This just fucking pisses me off." Izuku finds it curious. Is he felt nervous asking. "Kachan, are you jealous?" Katsuki rolls his eyes. "Don't be fucking stupid, Deku. Didn't you hear me the other week? I don't give a fuck who you sleep with." "Oh." Izuku didn't like that he wishes Katsuki did care, because he knew that he wasn't supposed to. Katsuki continued. "I just don't want that bastard's name on your back." Izuku pursed his lips. "So if I wear yours, I'll just be trading in one bastard's name for another's." Katsuki raised a brow and then lifted Izuku's chin with his hand. "So you know how to be fucking cheeky now, huh?" Izuku's face is red from the contact, but he still lets out a, "You're a bad influence on me." "And you still choose to see me 3 times a week?" Katsuki challenges him and lets go of his chin. Izuku and Katsuki keep each other's stares for a while, before Izuku just rolls his eyes. "You're right. So, Thursday? Are you free?" Izuku laughs. Katsuki backs off then, and shakes his head while flicking Izuku on the side of the head playfully. "You're fucking getting on my nerves," Katsuki comments before answering. "But yeah, I gotta pick up a suit and I'm getting tailored after practice, but after that, I'm free." "Great, I got an idea." Izuku grins. "Finally," Katsuki snorts. "I'm carrying our partnership here." "It's not my fault," Izuku frowns. "I was serious about what I said earlier, you know," Katsuki reminds him. "Wear mine next time." Izuku took a pause, then laughed lightly before nodding. "Fine then." Katsuki looks around. "You waiting for a ride?" Izuku shakes his head. "No, I came here with Shoto, but he's taking care of some business in the bathroom right now." "Gross. Was it the hot dogs?" Katsuki asks knowingly. Nodding furiously, Izuku replies, "Yeah, how'd you know?" "Denki." Katsuki laughs. The following weeks passed by quickly as well. It felt almost unfair that Izuku still had to help plan the dance that was coming up on Friday, yet he wasn't allowed to attend. Things at home have been in a state of limbo. He couldn't tell if his mother was good with him or not, and the tension was still hanging in the air despite their conversations being relatively normal. The weather was getting more and more humid by the day, yet it still hasn't rained once in Issei. The rainy month was due to come soon though, Izuku knew. So he just had to wait. Izuku occasionally spent his free period with Mr. Toshinori during his office hours, helping the teacher out with things or just talking to him. It was Wednesday, and Izuku was currently biting into his snack, a red bean bun, as he and Mr. Toshinori just caught up on life or talked about some random topics. "Oh, also Mr. Toshinori," Izuku mentioned, "I didn't know you used to be a bodybuilder." The frail man laughed. "I also used to be pretty well trained in martial arts. How did you know that, though? I don't exactly make it known." Izuku finished his last bite. "Kachan told me he saw old pictures of you online." "Young Bakugo?" Mr. Toshinori considered this. "Speaking of, how's the project going? Have you kept a journal?" Izuku looked apologetic. "No, we haven't. I don't really need to. I remember just about every detail." "I assume that's a good thing?" The teacher chuckled. The greenette looked off to the side and bit his lip. "I can barely tell anymore." His teacher considered that response. "How so?" Izuku didn't exactly know how to explain it. How could he define the juxtaposition of emotions he's feeling? The emotions that have been overwhelming him like a flood he couldn't ever prepare for. How could he explain the confusion of being grateful, mesmerized, and more alive than he's ever been, being around Katsuki, while also being terrified, nervous, and in absolute pain at the fact that he could feel his thoughts towards the blonde morph into something much, much more deep? Quietly, Izuku asked his teacher without asking, "Why did you have to pair us up, Mr. Toshinori?" The man in question looked concerned for a moment. "Is Bakugo treating you badly?" Izuku shakes his head and looks up at his teacher with a mixture of sadness and happiness in his eyes. "Most people might not believe it, but he's been treating me great. He's still Kachan. He doesn't coddle me, act happy-go-lucky, or sweet by any means, but—" Izuku can't believe he's saying this. "But it's perfect." Mr. Toshinori nodded, then asked, slightly confused, "Then if I may ask, what is the problem?" At this, Izuku laughed with a bit of pain in his tone. "The problem is that it will end. You heard the condition we agreed on that day in class," Izuku reminded him. "The problem is that he took me up in the sky, and now I'm afraid to go back on the ground and be without him." Izuku felt his hand shaking as he says it. "I sound stupid, don't I?" Mr. Toshinori goes quiet as he watches the student stare down at his empty hands, and then Izuku, shaking, tries to admit, "The problem is that I think I'm feeling more than I should." The psychology teacher then inches forward to place a hand on Izuku's shoulder, causing the greenette to look into kind eyes. "If you're going to feel it, regardless of whether you want to," the teacher began, "then just embrace it. Life gets easier when you learn to accept that you can only control your emotions so much." Izuku shook his head and smiled gently. "It's not that easy." "Who said it was?" Mr. Toshinori humored. Izuku just shrugged the conversation off. Anyways, I don't think I want to talk about this right now, he shrugged nervously. It already occupies my mind 75% of the time. That's fine, the teacher nodded understandingly. Take your time. How are the preparations for the dance coming along? Izuku shakes his head. Oh no, don't get me started. Gina, the head of decorations team, keeps trying to boss my team around, and that's not even her job, but I just kind of shrugged it off. I'm sure she doesn't mean to. And soon enough, the conversation was back on track with something less disheartening. Izuku tells his teacher more about the comics he's been reading, and the man replies with just as much enthusiasm. He really enjoyed Mr. Toshinori's company, and in a way, the man made up for the lack of father figure Izuku had. But eventually, the teacher had to get some things completed for his next class before the office hour period was over. Midoriya, could you take this copy to the copy room real quick for me and get about 24 copies? Mr. Toshinori handed him a packet of notes. Izuku takes it out of his hands and nods. Of course. Izuku exited the classroom and headed down several corridors. The copy room was on the far west wing of Issei High, and honestly was a little sketchy. Since it was hidden away by some corridors, it was relatively isolated from the busy hallways and whatnot. Izuku holds the papers close to his chest as he passes the almost maze-like hallways. Up ahead, he would have to turn a couple of small corridors before he could reach the copy room. But as he neared the turns, Izuku paused in his footsteps, because he was hearing voices, in which one was too awfully familiar. He steps a bit closer, and Izuku's stomach turns upside down. As he got closer, the sound was definitely people getting something on. Maybe not full on, but something was happening. Judging from the giggling, the sounds, that wasn't the problem. The issue was that Izuku could recognize one of their voices. It was becoming clear as day once Izuku got closer, and his heart was beating fast as he clutches the paper so tightly that it wrinkles. The breathing, the words, they all belonged to a voice Izuku hears in his dreams. He knew what was going on, and yet Izuku still walked forwards towards the sounds, which were mixed with laboring breaths and high-pitched giggles here and there. Izuku felt his fingers tremble a little bit, and he bit his tongue as hard as he could to push down his emotions. But those twisting gut sensations began to hammer in. As he turned the corner, seeing it made it worse. It only solidified to Izuku's mind exactly why he has to get rid of these growing emotions that he's been experiencing lately. Because it would never end well, not with someone like Katsuki, who at the current moment had someone against the wall with his large build leaning over her. Izuku didn't even bother to look who it was, because all he could see was Katsuki looking at someone else, hands on someone else. The girl would pull him down to say something, giggle, before kissing the blonde. Her hands traveled down to his waistband and played with it. We could do it here, you know, she teased him. Katsuki smirked. I can't get kicked out. Got a feature and all that shit. As his hands played with the fabric of her shirt. Izuku felt like he couldn't breathe. He wished he was anywhere but there. Absolutely anywhere else. He couldn't stand and watch anymore, and Izuku bit his tongue tightly to distract himself from thinking. Forcing his legs to move, Izuku walked forward, trying to get past the two of them. He couldn't get the image of Katsuki out of his head, the one that whisked him away that night, who taught him how to pole vault, who sneaks into his room just to play video games. And then the image in front of him just makes it hurt even more when he's thinking back to those moments. Because it reminded Izuku that at the end of the day, Izuku was just Deku, the boy Katsuki hung out with, and nothing else. It wasn't Katsuki's fault. Katsuki was not obligated to do anything, and it would be unfair of Izuku to want him to be a certain way when he just wasn't. At the sound of someone approaching, the girl jumps back and yelps. Izuku glances briefly at her and recognizes her to be someone from one of his extracurricular activities, but he couldn't recall her name. Katsuki moves his head carelessly to look at who it was, but Izuku doesn't turn his head at all to see what kind of expression the other had when he realized. Midoriya? The girl apparently knew his name. God, you scared me. I thought you were a teacher or something. Izuku looked down at the ground as he tried to shuffle past. Sorry, he said softly, but she didn't let it go. Hey, she called out. You're not gonna snitch or anything, right? Aren't you, kind of a killjoy? That kind of hurt, because she wouldn't be the first to call him a goody two-shoes, and she wouldn't be the last. Oi, Izuku heard Katsuki's voice warn her. Don't call him that. Izuku, without thinking, turns to Katsuki, avoiding those ruby eyes that always seemed to ignite a fire in his soul. "Kachan, it's fine." His voice was gentle, in an attempt to not let it crack. "I don't care if you fucking think it's fine," Katsuki tells him, but Izuku looked away by now. "Please, just leave," Izuku let out in a small voice. "I'm trying to copy some papers and you're in my way." The blonde goes silent, and Izuku doesn't bother looking at him. He knew that if he faces him, it'll be obvious. It'll be so obvious how he's feeling, because his eyes always revealed something. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, Katsuki walks away first, not bothering to take the girl with him, who doesn't take long to follow, calling out after the blonde. Izuku numbly walks forward until he reaches the copy room, and then as he waits for the papers to copy, Izuku leans over the machine and bites his lip hard in order not to cry. "You can't do this, Izuku," he tells himself. "You can't want him." He forces himself. Anyone but him. Izuku didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. Izuku walked around that day in school looking like an absolute mess. His hair was tousled from being grabbed out of frustration from his own fingers. His eyes were distant, and he obviously looked distracted. His friends asked him what's wrong, but Izuku refused to admit it. He didn't want to feel any of these things. As the greenette now walks down a relatively empty hallway after school to get to the gym, where all the dance were set up, Izuku's lips were in his permanent frown. He hadn't even noticed someone was walking towards him until he heard a voice call out his name and jog up to him. "Midoriya!" Kaido waves. "Are heading to the gymnasium?" Izuku nods with a little energy. "Yeah, are you on your way to practice?" Kaido confirms with a head nod. "Sure am." Then he notices the state of Izuku. "Hey, what's up with the mood?" Izuku blinks and purses his lips. "Sorry, I've just had a weird day." Kaido takes in the information. "A good weird or a bad weird?" Izuku laughs gently. "I'd say a bad weird, but it'll be okay." Kaido thinks on it. "Any chance I can help?" The greenette smiles at Kaido's attempt. "I'm not sure you can help with this one, Kaido." "Not even..." Kaido slyly leans over to Izuku. "If I take you out on a date tomorrow night, I promise I can make you smile." "I smile a lot already," Izuku points out teasingly. "It's not very hard to do, Kaido. I think you need to up your game." "Aw, come on," Kaido pretended to be wounded. "Give me a chance. I'll wine and dine you, and if I'm lucky, I'll get a kiss at the end of the night. And hey, if it goes further, I won't mind." He raises both of his hands. Izuku shakes his head in amusement. What a tempting offer. Wining and dining didn't interest Izuku that much. It was sweet, but it didn't give Izuku the breathtaking feeling he got when he explored the woods or swam in the lake underneath the stars. That being said, Izuku wonders if this is what he needed. A distraction, or a chance to make his feelings for a certain blonde go away. If nothing else, he might even get himself an outlet for sexual frustration. Not that he wanted to use Kaido like that. Although Izuku respected people's choices in sexual freedom, Izuku just wasn't the type to do that kind of thing without a second thought. Tempting enough to say yes? Kaido crossed his fingers. Izuku considered it. "Tomorrow is Thursday, right? What time? I have to hang out with Kachan a little bit for the project, but after that, I'll be good." He'll just tell his mother he's running late. Bakudeku, huh? Kaido takes that into account. "How about 8? I'll pick you up from where you and Mr. Perfect are. Just text me where." "It's a date then?" Kaido asked. Izuku bounced on his feet a little before nodding. "It's a date." When Thursday came, Izuku dropped into the practice track as he usually did, with a bottle of Gatorade in hand. The blonde athlete was already performing his runs, and Izuku's heart began to beat again. Several thoughts flashed through his brain. The first was that, wow, the boy was absolutely incredible. The second was the images of what happened yesterday, which caused a sensation of kicking pain in his gut. They still haven't talked since then. Not that Izuku was actively avoiding him, but they just haven't seen each other. And then the third thought was Izuku hating the fact that despite everything, he was still too fucking happy to be hanging out with the athlete again today. Because no matter how he felt, they were still friends, even if neither of them had actually said it. And friends had fun with each other, as he always did with Katsuki. Usually, when Izuku would come in during solo practice, the blonde would ignore him until he was on break. But this time, when Katsuki notices Izuku settle down on the bench, The athlete drops his pole and saunters over to the shorter male. Oi, you ever gonna tell me what the fuck was going on with you yesterday? Izuku's mouth gaped, and he looked away quickly. What do you mean? Izuku thought he'd handled himself pretty well at what had happened. You acted like someone kicked a damn cat, Katsuki told him. Didn't even fucking look at me when you spoke. And when you took the shit from the bitch. Keep in mind, this is the same bitch you're having sex with, Izuku reminds him, feeling his tongue dry at those words. I didn't fuck her, Katsuki snapped, and Izuku looked at him with confused eyes. Izuku found himself asking, why? Katsuki looked taken off guard by the question, but then barked out a gruff, It's not for you to worry about, shit nerd. And you never answered the damn question. What the hell was wrong with you? Izuku bit his lip, not willing to divulge, and so he just tells the other, I just had a bad morning, which wasn't necessarily untrue. At this point, Katsuki's expression seemed to soften a little bit, and the athlete looked over to the side before walking off. Tell me more about it after practice. Don't you have to pick up a suit? Izuku calls after him. Fuck, Katsuki remembered. Then tell me when I pick you up to do whatever it is that you wanted to do. I'm not forgetting. You better tell me, you little shit, he said before picking up his pole. Izuku smiles to himself. If nothing else, then he knew that in his own way, Katsuki cared, even if it wasn't a conventional way. Even if he was as a partner or friend, the blonde was concerned about how he felt, even if he was the cause of it. Izuku gets ready for both his hangout with Katsuki and the date with Kaido when he gets home. It probably wasn't the best idea that they were back to back, but he knew he wouldn't really be allowed to go out so easily with someone who his mother didn't know yet. Katsuki had texted him that he'll pick him up after he grabs the suit from the tailor, which wouldn't take too long. And so, Izuku stands in his room, forced to dress himself instead of having his friends to do it for him. Izuku stands there in his underwear, wondering where to start. He didn't have a lot of non-basic clothes, but he was sure he had some pieces in his closet somewhere that would pair nicely. Ultimately, after 30 minutes of contemplating, the greenette settles on a pair of light-washed jeans that tapered at his ankles and seemed a little too tight on him, and on the top he wore a white silk long-sleeve shirt on top that was tucked loosely into his pants, giving him a more effortless but beautiful look. On top of the top couple buttons were left undone to reveal a smooth, expansive skin. He looked put together enough. It wasn't anything intense, but it will work for a date. And when he walks out the door to wait on the porch, he's thankful that the sky looks beautiful today. It's perfect for what he wanted to show Katsuki. As the blonde had mentioned before, there weren't many places in Issei that the blonde hadn't already been to, and so, like the drive-in theater, Izuku's suggestions usually had to be a bit more out of the box. He wonders if the boy will like it. And when the black Audi A8 pulls up to his house, Izuku walks with the familiar path across his grass to the passenger door. From the rolled-down windows, Izuku could see that the boy had Ray-Ban aviator sunglasses on, and there was music playing from the speakers as usual. Is What's Love Got to Do with It by Tina Turner. Izuku personally did not like the intro of the song, but the chorus was instantly recognizable by just about everyone. Again, Izuku wonders how Katsuki could listen to all these classic 80s love songs and not understand what any of the emotions described in the songs mean or feel like. Izuku opens the passenger door and slides in, pulling his seatbelt on automatically. Kachan, Izuku greets, excited for what he has planned. Did the suit come out fine? Instead of replying to him, Katsuki simply took a look over at Izuku. At the silence, the greenette pauses, then turns to Katsuki for a response. Through the aviator glasses, he could still see the blonde's eyes giving him a look up and down with furrowed brows. Izuku suddenly felt very shy. Katsuki then stated, This is different, gesturing to Izuku's outfit. Izuku nervously chuckles and scratched the back of his head. It's not bad, is it? Looking back onto the road, the blonde put the car in drive and pulled forward onto the street. No, Katsuki admits with an indifferent tone, even though he just implied Izuku looks nice. What's it for, nerd? Izuku suddenly felt weird about admitting it, as if it was wrong to, but he shifts in his seat. I have a date later. Katsuki raised a brow and glanced over at Izuku. A date, huh? Izuku nods, and then just kind of sat there quietly in his seat. Katsuki didn't say anything either, just driving around for a little bit, even though they didn't actually have a destination put in. Finally, the blonde asked him, "With who?" Izuku thinks this was probably what he was most nervous about, telling Katsuki who it was, but then he thought to himself, why did he have to be nervous? It shouldn't matter to him. "With Kaido," Izuku tells him, and Katsuki, oddly enough, doesn't say anything snarky. Instead, the boy keeps driving forward, not glancing over at Izuku. His expression was neutral, and Izuku doesn't know why that almost disappoints him. When the athlete speaks up again, he simply tells Izuku, "So Fuckface finally got what he wanted. Good for him." And then he slaps the steering wheel sarcastically with every word he repeats. "Good for him." Izuku looked over at him with slight concern. "Kachan?" "What is it?" Katsuki said, head leaning back against his seat as he drives. The greenette fidgets with his thumbs. "Is everything okay?" The blonde nods, then reaches a hand out to ruffle Izuku's hair. "Yeah, why wouldn't it be, nerd? Anyways, where are we going? I've been aimlessly driving." "Oh," Izuku forgot to tell the other. "First, can we go to the grocery store to pick up some snacks?" Katsuki raised an eyebrow, wondering what it was they needed snacks for, but shrugs. "Yeah." What should have been a 10-minute grocery store run turned into an hour one. How in the world that happened could only be explained by Katsuki and Izuku. What was supposed to happen was they drop in, grab things off the shelves, and pay, and then head out to wherever they were going next. But what actually happened was that they were practically children, and the moment Katsuki saw in the fresh product aisle that they had stalks of aloe vera over a foot long, the blonde ran over there and grabbed one, holding it from the flat end, and Katsuki pointed the sharp end at Izuku and announced, "En garde!" And then, right then and there, quick to defend himself, Izuku grabbed one too, and pointed it right back at Katsuki. And there they proceeded to have a sword fight with aloe vera stalks, right there in the grocery store. The only reason they stopped was because a worker had come up to them saying that they now had to pay for the 2 stalks, since they were messing with it. And so now, there were 2 stalks of aloe vera sticking in their cart that neither of the boys knew what to do with. The second reason why the grocery run took so long was because they stopped by the bread section to argue of what kind of bread was the best, even though neither of them planned on purchasing bread. The little argument caused a bit of commotion, and no one around them could expect that they'd come to the grocery store to hear debates whether whole wheat or white bread tasted better. The actual process of picking out snacks barely took any time. Izuku and Katsuki respectively picked their own drinks, and the greenette grabbed a soda pop, while Katsuki just took another sports drink. Grabbing some bags of chips, candy for Izuku, and grain bars for Katsuki, they finally got around to checking out, earning looks from workers. "I'm surprised we weren't banned from there," Izuku commented when they exited the store. The sky outside was a pretty pink, washed over the clouds beautifully. Katsuki was pushing the shopping cart towards his car. "I'm more concerned about what the fuck we're supposed to do with these aloe vera stalks." And they loaded the snacks in the back. Katsuki holds up the stalks as if conflicted. Izuku laughs and grabs them to put them down. "Just give them to me. I'm sure my mom could use them to grow or something. They're good for sunburns." "Who the fuck even gets sunburnt in Issei?" Katsuki asks as he closes the trunk. "It's always goddamn sunny here. We're all used to it." "Unless you're my mother and I," Izuku pointed out. "Right," Katsuki snorts. "I forgot Auntie's a homebody, and you were too before I corrupted your nerd ass." "Right. Why do you have to say it like that? It makes me feel like I'm a demon or something." "You are." Katsuki flicks the side of his head, and Izuku frowns, but Katsuki gestured to Izuku. "Get in." They were still outside and Katsuki holding the shopping cart, so Izuku was confused. Where? The car?" "The shopping cart," Katsuki told him. Izuku narrowed his eyes at the taller, but decided to just go with it. He's past questioning the weird things that Katsuki wanted to do. And so, holding on to the sides, Izuku hoisted his body into the cart, which fit well, and he held his knees up to his body. Suddenly, the acceleration picked up as Katsuki started pushing him while running with the cart in front of him. Izuku yelled and held onto the sides, but the athlete just cackled as he ran through the parking lot with the stripe of the stores towards the cartel corals. Above them, the pink skies made their skin glow orange, and Izuku's laugh mixed with the yelps at bumps on the asphalt filled the air. And then, as they approached the cart coral with plenty of carts already in it. Katsuki let go of him with one last push, and Izuku was rolling with momentum the cart had already had. The greenette yelled out, "Kachan, what the hell? The cart's going to crash! Come back, I hate you!" Katsuki yelled back, "You'll be fine!" Izuku turned back around, gripping tightly onto the sides of the cart as it heads towards the other ones. And upon impact, the sounds of the dozen carts all pushing together was scary, and Izuku was afraid he was going to tip over while inside, but he was just tussled a little bit. Feeling vengeful, Izuku hopped out of the cart and pulled it back, shouting for Katsuki to get in. Izuku demanded, "Kachan, your turn, get in." "You shit nerd," Katsuki pointed at the cart. "You think my legs are gonna fucking fit in that? If you haven't forgotten, I'm 6'4". "I don't care." Izuku pushed the cart against Katsuki's hip. "Get in now." Grumbling, Katsuki hoisted himself in, and looked awkward with his larger body trying to fit inside the shopping cart. Izuku was determined to make this hurt, and so the greenette began running around the parking lot, pushing the cart with the blonde inside. He went in circles and bumps, so the athlete yelled at him every time he didn't slow down before a speed bump, but Izuku merely cackled like a psycho. "That's enough, Deku!" Katsuki shouted over the velocity of Izuku's running. The boy in question asked, "Are you sure now?" "Yes, fucking stop, I'm gonna hurl," Katsuki warned him with a yell. "If you say so," Izuku said while swiveling the cart so that it was headed towards the pothole on the ground. It would flip over for sure. And then he let go, sending Katsuki hurling towards it. The blonde looked back at the green-eyed boy and threw up his middle finger. "You piece of shit, Deku! I didn't do this to you! Stop the cart now or I'll tell everyone you sleep with an All Might plushie!" "They probably could already guess," Izuku shouted back as he laughed. And when Katsuki turns around, the cart was feet away from falling into the pothole, shouting, "Fuck, fuck, 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 fuck!" Katsuki got up on his feet, holding the sides of the cart, and then right before it crashed, hopped off and rolled onto the ground once. Right then, the cart flipped over, and Katsuki gaped at it. Then the athlete began running towards Izuku at full speed, and the greenette, once he stopped laughing, barely had time to react before he was tackled off the ground and lifted into the air upside down, similar to how Katsuki first handled him on their very first project to hang out. "You trying to fucking kill me, you evil shit?" Izuku playfully berated him. "And to think everyone at school thinks you're a perfect sweet little angel." Izuku was upside down over Katsuki's shoulder, still laughing, and the greenette used this position to his advantage to try to pants Katsuki, which earned him a hit on the side of his thighs. "Kachan, okay. Izuku tapped on Katsuki's shoulder. "Put me down. All the blood is moving to my brain." "Good." Katsuki barks out a laugh. "Maybe then there will be something in your brain." Izuku kicks in the air. "That's so mean, Kachan!" Katsuki then sets him down and they got back into the car, and tells the boy to get in. Izuku, still smiling to himself, gets in the side door and buckles up. "So, we got snacks." Katsuki gestured towards the back. "Now, where are we headed?" Izuku suddenly gets nervous. "It sounds a little stupid, so I'm gonna direct you there." Katsuki rolled his eyes. "Again? You pulled the shit last time." "Yeah, well," Izuku shrugs. "I don't want you to judge my suggestion before we get there." "Fine." Katsuki turns towards him, turning the car on. "What road am I hitting?" Izuku then grins. "A left on McLean Boulevard." Izuku ends up directing them on the east end of Issei, more inland and away from the coast. The greenette tells him to turn by turn directions, and Katsuki follows them all the way until they approach a pretty flat paved area on the right side. It was an airport runway for the Issei's local airport that only flew to about 10 locations. "The airport?" Katsuki looked at him as he took notice. "The fuck are we doing here?" Katsuki ignores him and points in the near distance. "Over that bend, make a roundabout and get off at the road on top of the hill." Katsuki does so, driving up on the higher ground. And then at the hill, Izuku tells him to pull off the road and onto the grass, backing his car as the trunk was facing the airport runway on the side of the road. No one seemed to be taking off this road, so there was a newer airport road on the other side that people more commonly used. When Katsuki puts the car in park, Izuku unbuckles his seatbelt and gets out of the car, going into the back into what he could open the trunk. A moment later, Katsuki does the same and watches as Izuku moves the snack to the side and tosses the aloe vera over in the back seat. And then the greenette turns around and sits on the edge of the trunk, legs dangling off the side of the car, and pats the spot next to him. Katsuki looks at him weird, but sits down anyways. "As I was saying, why the fuck are we at the airport?" Katsuki. Izuku just smiles at Katsuki before looking down at his hands, feeling a bit shy as he confesses. Because you said you liked them. What, the airport? Katsuki tries to recall when he has said this. No, airplanes. Izuku laughs airily. Katsuki said he had said so the evening when they tried to watch the movie. Not to mention, Izuku saw the 2 model planes in the boys' room. And then Izuku looks out. From their position on the top of the small hill, they had a perfect view of the small airport's runway during a sunset. A plane had recently took off, and it looked so large as it flies overhead, and currently one was preparing to move out onto the runway. Above them, the sky was deepening its pink and oranges as the sun continues to set. Katsuki then looks out too, tilting his head up, just in time to see the previous plane passing right above them, leaving a trail of gas in its path, and then at the one preparing to take off. And the blonde's eyes widened. Izuku watched his Katsuki rather than the sight and saw a glimmer of awe in those ruby eyes, and his breath hitched. He kept digging a deeper hole for himself, and yeah, in moments like these, he doesn't mind digging deeper. The car was parked but not completely turned off, and so Katsuki's playlist was still running. Izuku recognized the beautiful voice of Kenny Rogers singing Lady in the background, and he wonders how the next lyrics could be so perfect for the moment. As he stares at Katsuki, looking out at the sight in awe, he finds himself lip-singing the next line. You have gone and made me such a fool. He hates how he felt those words from the bottom of his soul. Katsuki then relaxes back into the seat and looks over at the shorter male, who then looks away. You said something like that before. You noticed that? Izuku glances back at them and says, Said what? Katsuki makes a slight gesture. At the drive-in. You said that before. The brunette then remembers. At the drive-in, when Katsuki had asked why they were there, Izuku had almost the exact same response. Because you said you liked it. Realizing it now, Izuku finds it funny, yet in a way sweet. Because Izuku, during every time they hung out, felt as if he was the one experiencing something so incredible, so new. He loved everything, and Katsuki opened his eyes to how beautiful life can be, even if it wasn't intentional. Yet, it was also important to Izuku that the blonde was also getting to be the one that experiences this kind of awe and surprise once in a while, when Izuku has some kind of idea, and so he regrets nothing. Ah, I have, Izuku then admits before looking out again at the scene. The plane that had been preparing to take off was beginning to run faster. They both turned to watch it take off. Katsuki watches silently with the music in the background setting the frame, and they sat side by side as the flying machine takes flight. Izuku could see how, as a little kid, these things mesmerized Katsuki even enough to want to fly too. Finally, Izuku reaches back and grabs some of the snacks and tossed them to Katsuki. Katsuki popped open a bag of chips and told the other, This shitty picnic ain't half bad. Izuku rolls his eyes with a grin. You can just say that it's nice, you know. But what's the fun in that? Katsuki reasoned as he leans back to watch the runway some more. Izuku cracks his soda pop open and takes a sip of holding the glass bottle between his fingers with one leg rested up on the trunk. Have you ever been in an airplane before? Katsuki hums. I traveled here and there with the old hag and Pops, yeah. You? Izuku shakes his head no. Once or twice with my dad when I was tiny, but not since then. The blonde then turns his head slightly to look at Izuku, who meets his gaze. You remember much of him? The green-eyed boy shrugs. Just things here and there. That conversation drops there, and Katsuki instead points out to a plane that was parked in the distance. You see that one, right? Izuku cranes his neck before nodding. I got a model of that in my room. I fucking love it. Katsuki grinned, and Izuku likes seeing the blonde sound so adolescent and carefree like this. I saw it, Izuku informs the other. You got 2, right? Sure do. Then the athlete paused, taking a moment before asking Izuku cautiously, Oi, what else did you see in that drawer? Izuku's mind immediately flashed back to the photos on top of the drawer, the one of him and Katsuki when they were young, and he doesn't voice it. Nothing, Izuku tells him. Just saw the models on top of it. What's the other one? Katsuki then takes a larger gulp from his sports drink. It's a Gemini A-82 jet plane. They definitely don't have it here. Izuku leans back on his arms. Where do they have those? In Germany, Katsuki informs him. And then Izuki sits there and watches both Katsuki and the planes as the blonde then goes on to ramble to him about airplanes. It seems like a hobby that interests Katsuki and hasn't touched too much since he was little, and he has grown out of it. But reminiscing cool facts from when he was younger seem to excite the blonde, for Izuki smiles as he sees Katsuki's red eyes light up for once he would recall something interesting. The old hag takes fashion way too fucking seriously, Katsuki said at one point when they began talking about him picking up a suit earlier, so I was practically forced to get mine tailored for the dance. On the bright side, I look fucking incredible. Izuku figured that Katsuki was probably right. What color is it? You'll see at the dance, idiot. Katsuki finished the drink. Why the fuck are you asking now? Izuku sighed and swung his legs off the side of the car. Oh, I'm actually not going. The fuck? Katsuki commented. Aren't you on the planning committee? Yeah, it's a little unfair, right? Izuku laughs. Guess what happened? I'd bet $100 it was Auntie. Katsuki snorts. Izuku looked out. And you'd be right. You can't just sneak out or something? Katsuki suggested. Izuku shook his head. She said she called the school so that she'll be informed if anyone sees me there. That's actually fucking psycho, Deku. Katsuki frowned. Izuku shrugged, not wanting to talk badly of his mother. She means well, but it's a shame. Izuku smiled over at Katsuki. I bet you do look pretty handsome with that suit. Katsuki just met his eye, and Izuku wondered if he shouldn't have said that. It had slipped out, and Izuku didn't know where the confidence came from. Those ruby eyes held his for a moment before the blonde looks back to the airfield. It's a classic black. Katsuki then says, Izuku said out of confusion. The blonde still doesn't turn towards him. You asked what color it was, didn't you? It's a classic black. Oh, Izuku takes into consideration. Do you know how to dance? Katsuki snorts. Of course I do. Why? Don't tell me you don't. Izuku laughs. I don't. I was really looking forward to the dance. I was hoping I could learn before then, but I guess there's no need to now. Katsuki takes this into consideration. Maybe you could go to an after party. There'd be no one to snitch on you there. Maybe, Izuku shrugged. But things are a bit tense. I don't want to risk it right now. Suit yourself, Katsuki said indifferently. Oi, Deku. Yes? Izuku looked over. Katsuki then points towards a plane in the distance. Ain't that one ugly? Who the fuck paints a lime green plane? Izuku frowned at it and defended it. What's wrong with green? And every time the conversation topic shifted, it was so smooth, with a lapse in space. Everything felt so natural, and Izuku could sit here for an eternity, listening to the music, watching the planes take off underneath the stunning Issei sunset, and having good conversation with Katsuki. If he could keep this moment in his pocket and go back to it whenever he wanted, he would. They sit there for a while, until the sky is nearly dark, and the crickets begin to sing its song in the grass. The runway lights turned on, and Izuku feels around for his phone. What time is it? Izuku asks. Katsuki turns off the music and checks his phone. 7:24, why? I'm getting picked up at 8. Izuku leans forward on his knees. Katsuki stayed laying back and looking out at the runway. So, is Fuckface coming here, or am I taking you back to his house? To your house. He'll come here, Izuku replies. I already texted him the address. Great. Katsuki rolled his eyes. So now I have to see the fucker outside of practice and lunch. Izuku elbowed him gently. It'll only be for a minute maximum, Kachan. A minute too long. Katsuki then turns his head to face Izuku. Even in the growing darkness of the sky, those eyes still shone with intensity. What are you two doing anyways? Katsuki asked nonchalantly. The brunette thinks back to the conversation with Kaido in which he had agreed to the date. He said something about wining and dining me, even though he can't legally drink wine. At this, Katsuki actually cackles, almost patronizingly. The shithead is gonna wine and dine you? What a fucking prick. You like that, Deku? Is that the kind of guy you like? A perfect little gentleman? Izuku frowned at the cynical statement, even though Katsuki wasn't necessarily wrong in his doubt. Although Izuku enjoyed a nice conversation over dinner, he much preferred the thrill of swimming at night somewhere, or even walking around some abandoned building with no plan in mind. Spontaneous. That's how Katsuki had described it. But still, he was defensive about it, telling Katsuki, I'm open-minded, Kachan. I think it's sweet. Sweet. Sure. Katsuki snorts, resting his forearm on his temple from his laid-back position. And then what? You're gonna give him a little peck on the cheek when he drops you off? How fucking adorable. Izuku berated Katsuki for this comment. Kachan, is it really that hard to see me doing anything? You act like I'm your innocent little brother or something. Izuku frowned. You most definitely are not. Katsuki then looked at him. Izuku sighed and laid back. Then I don't understand why you always make comments like that. How many times do I have to tell you I'm not a child? He wished that Katsuki could see him as a subject of beauty like others did. Never said you were, Katsuki argued nonchalantly. But you act like it, Izuku complained. Besides, you literally saw me make out with Ren. Izuku blushed at the memory. I'm capable of more than just pecks, you know. Katsuki sneers. Sloppily making out while drunk doesn't say much, Deku. Izuku turned and did what Katsuki usually did to him, reaching out to flick his head. I'm good while sober, too. Don't make fun. Katsuki grabbed his wrists, and then, when Izuku was going in and sat up at the same time, he pulled Izuku forward. And so now the brunette was leaned more towards the blonde, who was looking down at him with those intense red eyes and a slight smirk in the corner of his lips. Izuku's wrist was held tightly in Katsuki's rough palm, and Izuku blinked up at the taller man, confused. Show me, then. Katsuki waited a moment before smirking and saying in his gruff voice, Deku. Izuku blinked. What? Kachan wanted him to do what now? All of the thoughts in the brunette's head flew out of the window for a hot minute as he continued to just look up into the other's eyes, not breaking contact in the slightest as he searches for some type of answer to reveal itself. Or for the blonde to reveal that it was a joke. This was most definitely a turn of events that Izuku was not expecting, and the boy could not collect his thoughts for shit. Show you? Izuku stammered out. Maybe he was interpreting it wrong. Show me, Katsuki repeated again, voice just as deep and alluring. And no wonder Izuku's knees felt weak even though he was sitting. But, Izuku's throat went dry. We aren't. It doesn't mean anything, shit nerd, Katsuki tells him. I'm merely giving you a chance to prove yourself. That's all. He grinned mischievously. It's not like I'm asking to fuck you. Izuku wonders if there's a way to rewind this conversation. He whispers, shocked. Who in the world says things like that? Katsuki shrugged, then lets go of his wrist, leaning back against the back seat of his car from the trunk, and resting his head back on his crossed arms behind his head. Don't then. Like I said, it doesn't fucking matter, he says with less care in his voice. But Izuku continues to stare at the other incredulously. Katsuki was so nonchalant about it, as if making out with a project partner and dare say friend on a whim was just the average Thursday night activity. Izuku doesn't actually remember the last time he's kissed someone sober. It's probably a while, considering that he doesn't get to go out much, and now that he does, he only goes out with Katsuki, who is kissing literally anyone else but him. And then Izuku wonders, like he has before secretly, he wonders what the blonde's lips felt like on his. Katsuki looked as if he did everything roughly. He kissed rough, he fucks rough, he lives rough. The thought of that brought a feeling of desire and curiosity pulling to his stomach and his brain, and Izuku can't deny his physical attraction to Katsuki if he wanted to. At the current moment, the blonde was just leaning back slightly, mentioning something to Izuku about engineers of this one flight that crashed over the Pacific Ocean a couple years ago. Eyes looking out onto the runway once more. The sky was just so beautiful with its purplish hue illuminated the planes as they took off. But Izuku couldn't pay much attention. All he could think about was the offer. It was right there. Sure, it was so that he could prove himself, although he didn't need to prove anything to Katsuki. And sure, it was definitely on the whim, and Izuku wonders how much Katsuki could be nonchalant about it, but fuck. The curiosity was killing him. It would have been fine, right? If Katsuki said it didn't mean anything, then it would have been the same if the two of them were going to a shop to buy a cheesecake, right? Izuku knew that it was not the same situation at all, and he also knew that whatever strange feelings he's been harboring will only set ablaze if he were to follow through. And yet, in a moment of desire and spurred confidence, Izuku pushes himself on his hands closer to Katsuki. At the movement, The blonde athlete turns his head, which was still resting against his folded arms, and looks to see what Izuku was doing. The brunette obviously looked hesitant, but pushed that away. Feeling his heart pound loudly in his chest was evidence that it didn't just mean nothing, but he still moved his body forward. Katsuki watched him. Izuku placed a hand on the blonde's chest so that he could slowly swing his body over where Katsuki was leaning back now. Izuku practically straddling the other's hip. One leg on the left side, one leg on the right, with Izuku's hand lying a little too sensually on Katsuki's firm chest. Understanding what was happening, Katsuki raised a brow as he watched all of this, but made no effort to move, simply watching as the doe-eyed brunette climbed onto his lap. Izuku felt something twitch underneath him, and he didn't let his imagination get too far because, God, he was not in the right position to do that right now. Izuku watched as Katsuki removed his arms from behind his head and placed them on either side of Izuku's pretty hips for more stability. And fuck, this was actually happening. Katsuki got the cue, and the ease at which the blonde transition just solidified in Izuku's head just how experienced the blonde was, and he suddenly felt competitive. Izuku was not the type to feel competitive jealousy, but with Katsuki, the athlete just made him feel everything that he wanted to do. Izuku wanted to prove himself all right, better than anyone else. The problem was how. He could talk the talk, but walking the walk is slightly different when he can't even remember the last time he kissed someone. But now, as Katsuki doesn't break eye contact with Izuku as he waits for the smaller boy to make a move, Izuku honestly threw all thoughts out of the window. The brunette brings his smaller hands up to touch Katsuki's jaw, a little too softly. He likes how strong Katsuki's jaw was, how his hand could touch it now, and he knows he's not going to forget this sensation. And Izuku was sure this isn't the type of touches that the athlete liked, but he still went through with it anyways, leaning in closer until his eyes fluttered down to the blonde's lips and then back up into those eyes. The music was off, so all he could hear was his own heart beating fast. Katsuki was close enough that the blonde could talk in a slight whisper, asking Izuku, "Oi, are you always this hesitant?" Izuku cuts him off and leaned in to kiss him, and Katsuki caught his lips immediately in a deep kiss. Izuku had his right hand gently on Katsuki's jaw, his left hand on the blonde's rib, and now his lips on the other's. Immediately, it felt like sensations bursted through his entire being. Kissing has never felt like this before. His heartbeat didn't slow down. His stomach flutters flared up. His face was heating up. But, my God, his head was full of dopamine high, because Katsuki's lips were so soft and tasted of cherries from the sports drink he had finished. Izuku was sure his own tasted like the sweetness of the soda pop. The blonde's hand still rested on his hips, and Izuku felt it hard to control the little pleasure high in his head. Fuck, he was kissing the person that he most definitely shouldn't be. Izuku moved slowly at first, and it was obvious that Katsuki was letting Izuku take the lead. Izuku liked to start his kisses soft, moving sensually and slowly in order to savor every single taste. He moved his head accordingly, and they matched very well. And so there they were, sitting in the back of the car with the trunk open, overlooking an airfield, making out slowly in the back of without a care in the world. Izuku's head was fuzzy, and all he could taste, feel, smell was the sweet sensation of Katsuki's lips. Izuku didn't even know when, but at some point the brunette moved his hand from Katsuki's jaw deeper into the blonde's head, pulling them closer in an even deeper kiss, and his lips began moving with a bit more force against the others. The build-up was making it really hard for Izuku to control himself down there, and Katsuki, taking the hint, grabs onto Izuku's hips tighter, pulling him in until they were flush up against each other. With Katsuki's back still leaning back against the back seat, Izuku let out a small gasp at the sudden tightness of the position. God, he was so close to Katsuki, barely an inch between any part of their body, and it was getting hot in the car even though the trunk was open. But Izuku couldn't stop. The pace picked up, as well as the intensity, because Izuku roughened the kiss a bit more, sucking a little bit here and there at Katsuki's bottom lip, and nipping even a little bit to up the rigor. They gradually moved faster, looking almost desperate as Izuku buries his hands in Katsuki's hair while the blonde athlete attempts to bring their hips even closer, rough hands digging up into his sides. The intensity of it all made Izuku gasp when he came up for air, just to go back in, tugging at his hair, clothes, skin, Lips. Izuku bites his lip to suppress a sound, but Katsuki pushes his way through and uses his teeth to bite and tug at a bit on Izuku's bottom lip himself. Izuku was sure his lips were going to be bruised by the end of this. Fuck, Katsuki breathed out of his mouth, and using his arm strength, moved both of them so that Izuku's back hit the floor of the trunk, his legs dangling out of the car in a still comfortable way. And Katsuki was on top of him, no longer allowing Izuku to take the lead. Izuku opens his eyes in a daze to see the athlete's large and strong build on top of him, and he knew that if Katsuki looked down at his pants, then he was fucked. Katsuki looked very hungry, and Izuku wanted his lips back on top of his so badly now. Kachan. Izuku found himself breathing out, chest going up and down to catch air. Katsuki leaned down and used a rough thumb to touch Izuku's soft and plush lips. Another hand cupped Izuku's soft face. The smaller looked up at him with big eyes before Katsuki's thumb pushed down between his lips. "Open your mouth," Katsuki ordered with him in a gruff voice, face barely inches apart, and Izuku instantly complied, as if his body wanted Katsuki so badly that it didn't listen to anyone else. The moment Izuku's lips parted, the blonde goes in and continues a deep kiss, but this time Izuku felt a swipe of the tongue inside of his mouth, and the odd sensation causes him to grab onto Katsuki's shoulder. The blonde didn't mind, and in return snaked his hands under Izuku's shirt, untucking it, grabbing onto his hip, with the athlete's rough hands on his bare skin. Katsuki kissed him with tongue, and Izuku was a quick learner, leaning into in order to wrestle a bit inside the mouth. The blonde was not playing around, and Izuku loved it. Izuku was right. Katsuki was a rough kisser, and he knew by the practical shoving of his tongue down Izuku's throat, the bites and tugs on Izuku's lips, and the bruising holding on his hips. Izuku matched his energy. The greenette was stuck in a loop of enjoying himself immensely, and having to think horrible, disgusting thoughts in order to keep it all controlled down there. "Wrap your legs around me," Katsuki demanded him again, and Izuku paused. There was no way that's happening, because then the athlete would know for sure he was having a problem down there. Izuku felt almost tempted to look down at Katsuki, but he didn't. Instead, continued to make out with the blonde, without complying to the request. Katsuki didn't drop it, however, and let go of Izuku's hip to grab Izuku's chin and tilted his head up. "I don't think you heard me, Deku." Izuku wanted to tease him. "No, I heard you, Kachan." Quirking a brow, Katsuki smirked. "Did you now?" before going back in, rougher than before, and Izuku wanted to moan into Katsuki's mouth, but prevented himself from doing so. He grabbed onto the other's back tighter, and Katsuki had no problem reaching his hands back under his silk shirt to grab onto his bare skin. They were at that for another 4 minutes before an interruption lit up the relatively dark car. At the sound of the ringtone playing, Katsuki lifted his head off of Izuku's and shielded his eyes from the light coming off of Izuku's phone. The greenette reached out for his phone, but Katsuki beat him to it. Lifting up the device, the blonde revealed that it was Kaido calling, and Izuku's eyes widened as he remembered his date. Oh shit. He had a date and not too long from now, but here he was making out with Bakudeku Katsuki. He didn't have a chance to finish his thought because Katsuki ended the call, tossing the phone to the side, and went back down to pull Izuku into a kiss, ignoring everything else. Izuku felt more heat pool into his stomach, but thoughts left his brain when the athlete began trailing his hands a little further. They were originally on his hips or his waist, massaging his thumbs into Izuku's bare skin, but now Katsuki seemed to want to explore a little further. Those large and rough hands began traveling, and Izuku knew Katsuki was heading up, where Izuku's budding nipples were perfect for playing. And the way Katsuki was going about it so natural, as if he used to do this natural progression of things. And then Izuku remembered the blonde probably was. These hands weren't meant for him, and those lips, the way they moved, were not meant for Izuku either. All Izuku was doing was so-called proving himself to the boy who's done this plenty of times. At the reminder, Izuku suddenly didn't feel so good. He didn't regret the kiss, although he might later, but he didn't want Katsuki's hands to go any further. Izuku didn't want this to just be another statistic in Katsuki's metaphorical chart of people who will give into his every beck and call. He knew the blonde wasn't actually going to go further, or at least he thought. The ending kind of confused him, however, the image of Katsuki having done this with others before causing a twisted feeling in his gut again. Azuki usually didn't care about someone's sex life. It was their choices. Ochako was beautiful, and even though she didn't mind sleeping around with people here and there was a mutual attraction. In fact, he knew plenty of people with lots of sexual freedom. But with Katsuki, Azuki couldn't help but feel immense jealousy. And he didn't want to. He hated negative feelings, jealousy, anger, sadness, the sorts. Azuki pulled away and used his hands to take Katsuki's off him. The blonde, taking it as a sign that Azuki was done, gets up off him and leans backwards on the side of the car, head tilted up. Breathing was also a bit heavy. Azuki's face was red as he pulled himself up too, now sitting across from Katsuki, looking at the other and trying to figure out what to say. The cricket sung its pretty song as always, and for a while it was just quiet. That had ended up being much more intense than both of them seemed to have expected, and Azuki was still stunned. Every time he closed his eyes, his head turned back the pages to relive the feeling of being kissed, being touched, being held like that by Katsuki. Ultimately, Azuki decided to interrupt the quietness with a joke. "So," he starts, "was that not the best makeout session you've ever had, or what?" From the other side of the car, Katsuki chuckles. "Never thought you'd be a biter, Deku." "And I never thought this would happen at all, Kachan." Azuki scratched the back of his neck. "Was it weird?" "Why would it be?" Katsuki stated apathetically. Azuki was quiet after that and shrugged. "I don't know." "I know I'm fucking amazing, but don't go thinking too much on it, nerd." Katsuki laughed sarcastically. Azuki wanted to humble a bit, so he lied. "You weren't even that special." Yes, he was. Katsuki leaned forward at this, trying to detect the lie in Azuki's eye, and suggested, "Well, that's too bad, ain't it? Should I try again and show you just how fucking special I can be?" He grins mischievously. Azuki pushes the blonde's head away with a laugh. "So, did I pass the mighty Kachan's test?" Katsuki looked at him, and then, head still tilted up, leaning against the back of his car. His eyes traveled down to Azuki's lips for a split second, and then those large green eyes. Azuki waited for a response. When he did reply, Katsuki simply tells him, "You're a fucking walking piece of work, you know that?" Azuki softly smiles at him. "That's barely an answer." "It's been over 5 minutes, and if I haven't told you by now that you're disgusting, what does that tell you, Deku?" Katsuki will say anything but the truth straight up. This time it was okay, because Azuki got the message. He pumped his fist dramatically and giggles. "I'll consider that a success, then." Then his phone dings with a text. Suddenly remembering again that he has something to do at 8, Azuki panicked and grabbed for his phone that was tossed aside in the middle of their little makeout section. Unlocking it, Azuki saw a text following up the declined call, saying that Kaido was going to be about 5 minutes late because of traffic, and then another text just now saying that he was about 3 minutes away. Azuki looked concerned before pulling out his phone camera, checking his hair, and yes, slightly swollen lip. "Oh my god." "What?" Katsuki deadpanned. "Look at me!" Azuki slightly panicked as he tries to get his hair back to the normal mess it was, rather than a complete mess. "I look like I just had my tongue shoved down your throat right before you had a date?" Katsuki laughed triumphantly. "That's 'cause you did, Deku. I'm sure Fuckface would be happy to know that." "You're horrible," Azuki mentioned with a strained voice as he fixes himself up. He'll just say he ate something and it gave him an allergic reaction. Azuki stands outside the trunk and then tucks his shirt back into his pants. He felt Katsuki's eyes watching him the entire time. "You're gonna kiss him like that tonight?" Katsuki asks, head still leaned back as he watches Azuki prep himself. Azuki glanced at Katsuki. He hadn't really thought about it. Azuki wasn't a prude, but he definitely didn't go crazy with anything. And yet, for some reason, Azuki wanted to know what Katsuki would say if he said yes, to feel what he does when he sees Katsuki with someone else. But then again, that was only possible because Azuki already had budding feelings for the other. Still, Azuki tells him, "If he wants to." Katsuki quirked an eyebrow, a habit Azuki noticed that the other has, and he watches as the greenette sits back down on the edge of the trunk, waiting for Kaido to arrive. Katsuki then asks, "Do you want to?" Pursing his lips, Azuki replies with a, "Maybe." To that, Katsuki just went back to looking out at the airfield. Moments later, the old road they had pulled up on, Azuki sees the headlights of a white car coming closer around the bend. Assuming that was Kaido, Azuki went up ahead to hop out of the trunk. Katsuki did the same, standing up to his full height, right beside Azuki as Kaido's car pulled up. When the white car came up next to Katsuki's black one, Kaido rolled his driver's side windows down and greeted both of them. There was a slight tenseness in the air. Bakugo. Kaido nods. Katsuki then gives him a slight nod back. Fuckface. Kaido laughs at this, used to the nickname, and waves kindly at Izuku. Midoriya, you ready to get swept off your feet? Izuku smiles kindly at him and lets out a small laugh. You're putting a lot of expectations on yourself, Kaido. I'll meet them. Kaido winked at him before commenting. You look gorgeous, by the way. Izuku flushed red. From beside him, with his hands in his pocket, Izuku notices Katsuki watching both of their interactions with a curious eye. Thank you, Izuku musters out shyly, and Kaido pats the side of his car. You want to get in? I'm going to roll my windows up before a mosquito flies in. Kaido began to roll up his windows, and Izuku nodded before looking up at Katsuki. Izuku decides to make a light comment before he leaves. Do you actually know his name, or do you just call him, fuckface? Izuku decides to make a light comment before he leaves. Oh, I just said that. Whoops. Because he rolls his eyes with a shake of a head. Of course I know his name. I'm his fucking captain. So sadly, I gotta know all of the extras' actual names. Izuku laughed, part of him not exactly wanting to go, but he bites his lip and smiles. I'm gonna go now. You don't need to announce it, nerd. Katsuki's tone was relatively calm, and Izuku nods to that shyly before turning around, not wanting to keep Kaido waiting, but just as he got merely a couple steps in, Katsuki steps forward and holds on to his arm. This causes Izuku to back halfway and look up to the taller male with surprised eyes. Katsuki looked down on him, and his lips were parted as if to say something, those same lips he had just kissed. Kachan? Izuku asked, blinking up at the other. He watched Katsuki look as if he had words to say, only to come up empty. The blonde's eyes had an odd look in them for a second, before they went blank, and he stepped back, putting his hands back in his pockets. Then Katsuki just told him, have a good time. It wasn't what Izuku had been expecting, but regardless, he smiles up at the athlete. It didn't completely reach his eyes. He almost wishes that the other hadn't said that. He almost wished that Katsuki didn't want him to have a good time. Stupidly enough, because of Katsuki, Izuku's thought process these days felt so backwards. Thanks, Kachan, Izuku says before he walks over to the passenger side of Kaido's car. Coming in, the boy was quick to strike up conversation and be very active about it, pulling Izuku in. Kaido was nice. This was going to be fun, Izuku tells himself, but as they leave, the greenette's eyes were on the rear-view mirror, and just as they were about to turn out of sight, he sees Katsuki sitting back down on the edge of the trunk, once more looking out onto the airfield. Once they get back onto the main road, Kaido tells him, I got us reservations at this one restaurant near a town square. It's Italian. Do you like Italian? Izuku turns towards Kaido and nods. I love Italian. Great. Kaido sounds proud of himself for picking well. By the way, I was curious. What were you and Bakugo doing at the airport? Oh, Izuku tells him. We just kind of sat there and watched the planes take off. Kaido laughs, running his hands through his hair. Was that Bakugo's idea? Sounds kind of lame, if you ask me. Izuku looked down at his lap. It was his idea, and Katsuki didn't find it to be lame as far as he knew. He says quietly, It's not lame, but decides he wasn't going to let this dictate the rest of their date, so he enthusiastically asked Kaido, So how does it feel to make it past regionals? Oh man, Kaido looked happy. I'm so nervous and excited at the same time, Midoriya. I think you wearing my jersey helped, he laughs. Izuku claps his hands. I'm glad I could play my part. Conversation with Kaido was nice. The brunette was naturally pretty talkative, and made sure to be attentive when Izuku was with Izuku like a true gentleman. The conversation had never died, which was good. The restaurant was a nicer Italian one, and the food was absolutely incredible. Izuku had manicotti with Alfredo sauce, which Kaido ordered chicken marsala, and then for dessert, tiramisu was always a good idea. It was different, but it wasn't bad, Izuku thought to himself. Kaido was a fun person to be around. He had plenty of stories to excitingly tell, and a handsome smile. The brunette made some sexual comments here and there, so Izuku knew for a fact that Kaido was interested in intimacy with him, but he wasn't disrespectful about it. After dinner, Kaido decided to walk around the town square to burn off their food. Izuku remembers visiting here with Katsuki at nearly midnight once, and they played in the splash ground. Going with Kaido was also really fun, for Izuku laughed a lot, and there was also a lot of interesting things about the other. When they got near the splash park again, Izuku looks up at Kaido, and maybe he just wanted to let loose for a moment, but the greenette asks, Do you want to play in the splash park? The splash park? Kaido looked over to the fountains going up from the ground. Isn't that for kids? Izuku pursed his lips. Yeah, but it's nighttime and no one's here. Since when was he so spontaneous, he wonders. True. Kaido nods his head and considers it. Maybe another time. I'd hate to have your pretty shirt wet. And mine, he commented with a large smile. I don't really mind, but Izuku goes along with it. We can just keep walking. Kaido did end up kissing him that night. At no point did the other ask about Izuku's slightly swollen lips, which was a blessing. It was right before they had got back into the car to drive Izuku home that night. The moonlight was basking on them prettily, and all the shops were cleared of people. Izuku saw it coming, and when Kaido touches Izuku's face from the side, the greenet lets him. It's been a pretty good night after all, and when the other leans down to kiss him, Izuku wonders how different it will be from the kiss he had earlier. So he meets Kaido halfway. It was nice, soft, and warm, but the explosions that were present when he kissed Katsuki, those were gone. Still, as Kaido deepens the kiss, Izuku responds to it. Although he felt a little weird that this was the second person he had kissed within a couple hours, what felt even more weird, though, was that for much of the kiss, Izuku's mind flashed back to the one he had earlier. Can I see you again? Kaido asks when he drops Izuku off at his house. The greenet begins to open the door, but he turns to Kaido. It had been a good date, and Kaido was also good company, and so, without making a promise, he still tells the other. Sure, with a smile before leaving. It was fine. The next day was absolutely hectic. Every senior at Issei High was talking about the dance that was happening that night. On one hand, Izuku was happy that he had helped with the planning and people were excited about it. On the other hand, he was sad that he wouldn't get to attend. He couldn't even sneak out, and so he'll just have to watch people's social medias or hear stories about it the next day. He wonders what stories he'll hear about Katsuki the day after, which girl or guy that he brought with him, if they went home together. He didn't really want to know, and thinking back to the kiss just yesterday made Izuku real because yes, that actually happened, and still haven't told anyone about it because, to be honest, he hadn't completely recovered from the event himself. Everywhere he went, people were talking about the dance. All of his friends' outfits were meticulously planned out, and it was fun to see pictures and hear. The spring dance was probably one of the biggest events at Issei High, especially for seniors. No one would ever want to miss it. The budgeting was always pretty high, so they had a good food, good lighting, good decor, and just good vibes. It was what everyone thought of when they romanticized high school dances. Slow songs, which couples swayed to, fast songs the whole crowd jumped to, drama about who's going with who, beautiful dresses and suits everywhere. Izuku was getting major FOMO. No one given the option would skip it. Which after party are you going to? Shoto asked the group. The after parties for the spring dance were always outrageously fun, and all of the Issei High seniors would never miss attending one. Probably more happened at the after parties than the dance itself. Ida replied with a shrug. I'm not going anyway. I'll just be attending the dance. Ochako perked up. I'm going to Kirishima's. It's the biggest one, isn't it? Everyone's going to be there. Izuku, you can still go to the after party, can't you? Your mom just said you couldn't attend the dance. Izuku shakes his head. I can't go to that either. I mean, I could sneak out, but that's risky. Sneak out? She looked at him with amused eyes. You've been kind of different lately, Izuku. Oh? Izuku looked shy. Is that bad? It's actually a little refreshing, Shoto chimed in. You look happier, Midoriya. Izuku smiled at his friends. I think I am. And when classes ends and he finishes his last-minute checkups for the dance, Izuku walks across the practice track field, as he usually does, and stops for a moment to watch. The team was taking a short break, and he hears bits and parts of the conversation from outside the fence, talking about the dance. Izuku couldn't stay long, since he had to help his mother with unpacking some shipments. But he caught eyes with Katsuki, who was standing with his group of friends talking for a moment, and Izuku waved. Katsuki merely nodded at him before turning back to the group. The rest of the night was lackluster, even more so considering what everyone else was doing. It took about 2 hours to unpack the inventory of shipments coming in for his mother's custom print shop. He and his mother had a pretty basic conversation. Inku could tell that Izuku didn't want to talk much, but didn't understand why not attending a dance could put him in such a mellow mood. Like she promised, they ended up watching a movie together on the couch, and it was nice. By this time, Izuku knew everyone was at the dance. His group chats were blowing up with messages about people getting ready just an hour ago, and now it was more quiet because everyone was there and didn't really want to check their phones, aside from posting pictures or stories. When Inko got tired, Izuku turned off the movie, and they both headed to their respective rooms. Not tired himself, Izuku turned on his TV and proceeds to watch reruns of a ghost show while aimlessly scrolling through social media. At this point, he's seeing plenty of pictures and posts about the dance. Everyone looked beautiful and handsome, and Izuku smiled as he sees a picture of his friends all dressed up and making silly hand signs. There were little snippets and videos too of people dancing to loud music or just doing something stupid. From his bed, he watched everyone else. On Mina's social, Izuku found himself stopping as he stares at a photo of a certain somebody from behind. Head turned slightly to the side, Kosuke looked handsome from the back, black suit fitting every single part of his body. His eyes were as stunning as they usually were, and Izuku smiled to himself. He wanted to see the front, he thought. He wondered what Kosuke was doing at the moment. On the side, a girl with a beautiful red dress that had an open back walked close beside him, and Izuku assumed that was his date. He looks at her for a while, and then at him again, and Izuku knew that if he were at the dance, he probably would have thought that they were an absolutely stunning pair. Scrolling past in order to make himself think less about it, Izuku just spends the next hour or two doing the same things. He got text message from some friends saying that they wished he was here, or some crazy thing that just happened. He looked outside the window and for a moment considered leaving, or at least going to the after party, which would probably start in another 2 hours once everyone got sick of the dance. Each person had to pay about $50 to attend, so they probably would want to make the most of it. But deciding not to risk getting into even more trouble and having greater restrictions placed on him, Izuku just lays in bed. It was only 10:30 p.m. or so now, and Izuku was really getting into a show that was premiering on his TV. The rerun had been watching earlier was getting boring, so he switched channels, and this was much more interesting. He didn't even check his phone. Completely immersed in the plot, Izuku jumps when he heard a disruption. Sitting up in his bed, Izuku looked around. There was something that he was hearing, but not well over the sound of the TV. So turning off the device and bookmarking the show for later, Izuku's room faded into darkness, but not into silence, because he heard music outside his window. It was faint at first, but then slowly it got a bit louder. Izuku frowned. He got up from his bed, stepped over some clothes he had lying around, and headed towards the window. Pushing his curtains open and lifting up the window a little bit, and right away sound flooded in. Izuku recognized the song well. Take My Breath Away by Berlin. Izuku absolutely loved this track, and when planning the committee, he was wondering which songs to request the DJ they hired. This was the first one that Izuku asked for. It was perfect for slow dancing, not that Izuku knew how to, but when he imagined beautiful school dances with purple and pink lights, balloons and string banners everywhere, and whatnot, he thought of this song. And then the song paused. Fuck! Izuku heard from somewhere past his lawn. There was a car parked on the side, but it was partially hidden by the trees of his neighbors had. However, Izuku recognized that voice anywhere, especially when it was cursing. Izuku's eyes widened, and he wondered if he had heard wrong. He looked back to check his clock, to see it was only about 10:45 p.m. The height of the dance was right about now, so there'd be no way Kosuke was here. And yet, when he emerged from the side of the tree line, Izuku felt his heart race. His hands on the window still gripping tighter. The athlete was dressed in a full suit and looked so incredibly perfect. Black shoes, black three-piece suit, with a white shirt underneath. It was unbeatable, and the handsomeness of it all made Izuku's breath hitch. In the picture posted on Mina's social, Izuku thought he looked incredible, but to see this blonde in person was something else entirely. But more than stunned, Izuku was confused. Was this real? What was he doing here? There was a dance happening. In fact, it was a huge dance that no one in their right mind would miss. It was such a tradition at Issei High that people's parents who still lived in Issei told stories of it to their children. And so what in the world was Kosuke doing here? In his arms was a large stereo, the ones that people hold on their shoulders. But Kosuke was messing around with the buttons, trying to get it to work, and cursing out the machine. At some point, Izuku saw Kosuke kick the device, as if it would make it work better. And when it finally seemed to work again, the blonde restarted the song and started jogging up onto Izuku's lawn. The yellow floodlight and porch lights on Izuku's house lit up the athlete. He stepped onto the grass with his nice dress shoes on. Katsuki looked up to where Izuku was in the window, and then set down the stereo on the grass. "Oi, nerd!" Katsuki yelled up, disregarding the neighbors and the fact that his mom was inside. "You heard me coming down the street or something?" Izuku was so confused as to what was happening, and then says to Katsuki, voice not as loud to alert his mother, "Your music isn't particularly quiet, Kachan. What are you doing here?" Izuku looks around and then speaks a little louder. "Kachan, I can't sneak out. She'll kill me." Katsuki then chuckled. "Oh, are you trying to be quiet and not wake her up? In that case, let me." He started shouting louder. "Yell louder and turn the music up some more." He reaches down and put the music up louder, and then added one last thing. "Besides, who said I was sneaking you out?" Izuku's eyes widen at the statement, and he stands there at the window for a moment, staring ridiculously at the handsome boy with his full suit lit up by his house floodlights, before looking back inside, and then back at Katsuki, who stood down on his front lawn waiting. Izuku bit his lip, and then hurried his way downstairs, practically stomping down because there was no way his mother was not already awake from the music. Izuku opened his door and stepped out onto the porch barefoot. Once Katsuki saw him, the athlete turned down the music back to a normal level, then looked back over at Izuku. "Okay, I'm here," Izuku tells him. "So what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be at the dance?" Katsuki kicks the grass with his nice shoes and looks up at the sky. "Well, I don't gotta be anywhere, Deku. No one tells me what to do." Izuku just shakes his head with an incredulous grin. "You know what I mean, Kachan." "Got bored," Katsuki then tells him, looking back down from the sky to catch Izuku with his eyes that Izuku was beginning to fantasize about when he closes his own. "You got bored?" Izuku gave him a humorous look. "At the biggest event of the year? That you only get to go to once? At the one thing that practically everyone was looking forward to all semester?" Katsuki gives him a sly grin and shrugs. "What can I say?" Izuku was still confused. It is only a matter of time until his mother comes out. "That doesn't explain why you're here, though. You know my mom is just gonna freak out, right?" "Not if I stay here," Katsuki argued, tapping his feet on the lawn before telling Izuku. "You told me you wanted to learn how to dance, right?" "Huh?" Izuku asked, holding him for stabilization. The athlete rolled his eyes. "The other day, you freaking dimwit. You said you wanted to go to the dance to learn. Come on, nerd. I brought the dance to you, so get out here." He paused. "I'll show you." And then Katsuki held out his hand, perfectly pieced together with a gorgeous watch and a titanium ring on his index finger. Izuku was still on his porch, and he was speechless. "I brought the dance to you." He looked down at the stereo on the grass, then back at Katsuki, who held his hand outstretched to Izuku. He looked so handsome. Izuku couldn't get a grasp on what was happening. It was nearly 11 p.m. Katsuki should be at the dance right now. A real dance. One that no one wanted to miss for literally anything else. With a beautiful girl in a red dress and all of Katsuki's friends. And yet he was here, in Izuku's front yard, asking for a dance. "Go back to the dance, Kachan." Izuku laughs, almost wanting to cry. Katsuki persists. "Why should I?" "All your friends are there, and everything is happening there," Izuku reasons with a funny smile. "You only get to go once. I don't want you to miss it." "Well, I really don't give a damn what you want," Katsuki snorts. "I want to dance." Izuku felt his heart want to jump out of his chest and pour itself out to Katsuki right then and there. "But I'm dressed like this." Izuku gestured down to his body. He was literally in his sleeping clothes, which consisted of a large t-shirt that had a comic figure that hung down to his thighs, and nothing underneath but his underwear. And he wasn't even wearing shoes. Meanwhile, Katsuki was dressed in a full formal suit, looking absolutely perfect, just a couple feet away from him. Katsuki merely told him, "You look fine to me." Izuku looked at him with wide eyes, searching for some kind of deception to reveal that this was a mirage. And he found nothing. Izuku was still wearing probably one of the dumbest looking things he could have worn outside, and yet this boy who stood in front of him dressed to the nines still would rather dance with him than go back to the biggest event in all of high school. Izuku hesitantly steps out onto the lawn with his bare feet towards Katsuki, and slowly Izuku reached out to take Katsuki's larger hands. The blonde looked at him, and then over at the door, keeping his gaze as if there had been a staring contest. Confused, Izuku turned around to see his mother had been standing at the door, having it partially open, and half of her body was leaning on the sides watching. Inkyo looked shocked. As she looked at what was happening on her lawn, Izuku sees Katsuki not breaking eye contact with the woman, as he holds onto Izuku's hand. It was obvious what was going on. Not only did the entire conversation happen out loud, but there was music, and Katsuki was evidently in a suit. The shorter male looked back at his mom to see her features softening a little bit. Of guilt? Etched into her expression? And then, with a small smile, and eyes that looked a little forlorn, Inkyo tells Izuku, "Stay on the lawn, please," Inkyo says with a quiet voice, "and don't forget about 12:30. Izuku's eyes widened, and then he watched as she quietly closes the door. And then he was just left with Katsuki on the front lawn, yellow lights illuminating the place. Izuku then tilts his head to look up at Katsuki, laughing. "I was wondering why you weren't cursing in every sentence." Katsuki turned his gaze over from the door back to Izuku, snorting. "Didn't want Auntie throwing a fit." Izuku still with his hands in Katsuki's, asked the blonde then in a slight whisper as the tall boy pulls him a little closer. "Why are you doing this to me?" Katsuki grins. "I told you, nerd. I got bored." "That's it?" Izuku laughs airily. Katsuki just affirms. "That's it." Izuku just stares up at him for a second, admiring how the floodlights highlighted the angles of Katsuki's face, and says, "I like this song." Katsuki takes this into consideration. "So put your hands on my shoulders and let's dance." Izuku tries to hide his smile and puts his hands up on Katsuki's shoulders, while the taller places his own on Izuku's waist, and then Katsuki began moving. Izuku shakes his head. "I don't know what to do with my feet," he giggles. Katsuki looks down between them and chuckles. "Step on my feet, I'll show you, idiot." Izuku bites his lip. He only sees that in movies, and then when he thinks about it, he honestly could be in a movie right now. And he climbed so that his feet were on top of Katsuki's, bringing them in closer. He tilts his head up to look at Katsuki when the blonde begins moving, pulling both of their weight as Katsuki tells him how to slow dance. This formation, Katsuki tells him the details, but Izuku could not pay attention. He wasn't at the school dance. He had a t-shirt on, and he was out on his lawn, and yet it was perfect. There were no disco lights, perfectly catered food and DJ music, no smoke machines, no one but him and Katsuki. But as Izuku stares up at the boy in question, he thinks that he prefers this. And then they dance for a while, playing different oldies with different moods. On the slow songs, Katsuki takes him into his arms, and they dance to the tempo. Izuku was getting the hang of it, not needing to step on Katsuki's feet anymore. On the faster songs, they both jump and dance ridiculously as if they were at a party, like little kids. They also sang out loud to some of the tracks, karaokeing as it neared 12 in the morning. Some of the neighbors turned on their lights, but it looked as if, upon seeing the scene, no one wanted to say anything, to disrupt the beauty of teenage ridiculousness. When it was as innocent as it would be a crime. Izuku's cheeks hurt from smiling so much, but he couldn't stop. He thought that if nothing else, this would be one of the nights he'll remember forever. At some point, they dance again to a slow track, tired of jumping around at the upbeat music. Izuku likes this. He likes when Katsuki spins him around or puts his hands on Izuku's waist, and now they just swayed close with each other. Katsuki's chin was resting on top of Izuku's head, and the greenet had his cheek resting up against Katsuki's suit-clouded chest, as they danced. "Didn't you go with someone?" Izuku asked softly, letting the slow music be more in the foreground. Katsuki just took a moment to reply, but just hummed. "I did." "And you just..." Izuku lets out a breathy laugh. "Left? If she had a problem, she can take it up with me another day." Katsuki tells him straight. Katsuki would rather dance with him. That was what Izuku picked up, and it made his entire body shiver. Katsuki would rather dance with him as the midnight passes, in front of his lawn, with stereo music playing in the back. "Fuckface was looking for you at the dance," Katsuki informs with a snort. "Pretty sure the shithead wanted to get a slow song in." Izuku thinks about it. I forgot to tell him I wasn't going." Katsuki seemed to take a moment before taking his chin off of Izuku's head, and instead to look down at the boy. Yesterday. How was your date? Izuku blinked up at him and tells Katsuki. It was good. The blonde considers this and asks with his forehead slightly leaned against Izuku's. Did he treat you well? Their proximity took his breath away, but Izuku found just enough to whisper to the blonde. Yes. With his answer, Katsuki didn't have much to say except for a quick, good. Izuku bit his lip. He wished he knew what was going on in Katsuki's head for the millionth time. The blonde didn't take his eyes away from Izuku and spun the grenade around once. What about the after party? Izuku asked. Are you going to that? Kirishima's hosting it, right? That's your best friend. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Stop asking dumbass questions, nerd. If your ass feels guilty about me being here, don't bother. Izuku looked concerned. But this is my after party, Katsuki tells him, tone even. At the words, Izuku feels as if he was on a slick slide with oil. He couldn't stop himself from falling if he wanted to. How could Katsuki say things like this and not expect him to feel the way he did? Izuku did not want tears to well up in his eyes, and so he looked away at the uncharacteristically sweet statement. Katsuki then looks down at his watch. It's 12:29. What did Auntie mean earlier when she said remembered 12:30? Izuku suddenly remembers his mother saying that. His eyes widen. Oh! What is it? Katsuki asked, frowning. Izuku then laughed. How much do you like this suit? Not understanding, Katsuki merely replied, I can always get another one. Why? Izuku then turned to look up at Katsuki, eyes happy as he stares up at the other. We have automatic sprinklers to water the grass at night. 12:30 is when they turn on. And like it was perfectly timed, just as Izuku finishes the statement, they hear clicking from several parts surrounding the lawn, and then water began shooting up in mist-like showers from the sprinkler system and onto the grass. Immediately, both Izuku and Katsuki were soaked, feeling the water trickle lightly on them. The yellow lights make the falling water look ethereal. Katsuki looked at Izuku as the water began to fall on his suit, which could tighten the fabric, and then up at the sky, where the falling water made it look like light rain, and then he grinned. Izuku watched it all unfold, and he smiled to himself. The stereo was still playing music, about to end a song. Looking back down at the shorter male, Katsuki then continued. My suit's already wet, he states. Might as well continue. Not missing an opportunity to waste a second of this night, Izuku begins to move again. Might as well. And so, with the sprinklers watering their grass, and while they danced, the two boys continued to prance around the front yard until practically every inch of them was soaked. But it barely mattered to Izuku. A song then came on, one that Izuku hadn't heard in a while. It was one of those songs that he knew all the lyrics of, even if it's been years since he heard it play. Bonnie had sung it in her last album, Luck of the Draw. The song was, ironically enough, I Can't Make You Love Me. And in the final moments of their dance, Izuku finds himself softly singing it against Katsuki's chest as they move. Turn down the lights, Izuku began gently singing. Turn down the bed. Turn down these voices inside my head. Katsuki took notice of the quiet singing from below. You ain't half bad. Thanks, Izuku smiles. Katsuki just listens. Izuku honestly hated this song, but he remembered never being able to stop listening to it, because it hurt, before he even knew what the lyrics meant. And now that he did, it kind of hurt even more. And yet he still sings. 'Cause I can't make you love me if you don't. You can't make your heart feel something it won't. Izuku sings as Katsuki picks him up and spins him around once. He laughs and continues. Here in the dark, in these final hours, I will lay down my heart and I'll feel the power. He wanted to reach up to Katsuki's face, but didn't. But you won't. No, you won't. 'Cause I can't make you love me. He takes a pause. If you don't. They keep swaying to the slow music. The wet fabric of Izuku's shirt clung to his body. The sensation of Katsuki's hands on his waist were amplified. I'll close my eyes, then I won't see. Izuku hated this line the most. The love you don't feel. He took a breath. When you're holding me. The lyrics hit him like a truck, and Izuku found himself unable to sing anymore, so he just continues dancing. He was surprised his mother didn't come out to berate him about getting wet, but even if she did, nothing could ruin how he felt. It was a mixture of pure happiness that radiated from the core of his being, and a feeling of doom, hiding around the corner, waiting to eat him up. Izuku takes in the moment one more time. Here the athlete was, with all the options in the world, and the freedom to go to the biggest dance, with the most beautiful girl, and attend the most fun after-parties, and instead, Bakugo Katsuki was slow dancing with him under the sprinklers of his front lawn, because Izuku couldn't go. He thinks that this is one of the most heartfelt things to ever happen to him, and one of the most heartbreaking people he's ever met. And so Izuku thought, even if this leads to heartbreak, even if this was merely an act of friendship or boredom, Izuku accepts it, fully. And knowing it will hurt, Izuku also accepts the facts. He was falling for Katsuki.